Chapter 81. Unknown Deserted Island. Magneto controlled the missiles in the sky with one hand, and then gently turned his right hand, and the direction of the missiles suddenly changed. Seeing that Magneto was about to use these missiles to destroy all the warships in the Cuban waters and kill the Blood-Eye Kate hiding on the Soviet warship, Professor X, who was confronting Mutant Polly, panicked. "Stop, Eric. Don't hurt innocent people." Professor X took a step back and took back his mental power. Ghost Polly, who was being suppressed by Professor X's mental power, was relieved. As long as we can kill the members of the Hellfire Club, tens of thousands of casualties, what does it matter? There is one thing that Black Emperor Shao said right. In this world, only mutants are the most noble. We are evolvers, natural selectors. We are born to be higher level and stronger than humans. Magneto said lightly while controlling the direction of the dense missiles. Magneto is a student of Black Emperor Shao. He has great respect for Black Emperor Zhao's theory of mutant supremacy. That is why he is very indifferent to the lives of ordinary people. He now only wants to use these missiles in reverse. Kill Blood-Eye Kate hiding in the warship. As for whether the humans on the warship will be killed by his missiles, this is not within Magneto's consideration. However, although Magneto does not consider the life and death of humans, but Professor X will never let Magneto kill innocent people indiscriminately. Eric, there is no difference between us and humans. Our awakening ability just gives us one more skill than ordinary people. Mutants are not special. Professor X frowned and completely disagreed with Magneto's theory of mutant supremacy. Professor X has always believed that there is no difference between mutants and ordinary people. They are essentially human beings. 047. It is just because the mutants' X gene awakening gave them the ability to have extraordinary abilities. This is just like among humans. There will always be a few super geniuses, great men who lead the times, etc. They also have extraordinary abilities. Mutants are equivalent to the genius group among humans. Geniuses are always not understood by ordinary people. This is not the fault of ordinary people. That is why Professor X is always demanding of mutants, but tolerant and gentle to humans. You are still so naive, Charles. Magneto looked at Professor X with some disappointment. He was not going to waste his words. He knew very well that Professor X was more stubborn than himself. Magneto had persuaded Professor X more than once, but Professor X always believed that he was right. Over time, Magneto stopped persuading. He no longer paid attention to Professor X, but concentrated on controlling the missiles. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. All the missiles began to accelerate. They sped towards the warships in the waters of Cuba. Oh God! In the waters of Cuba, tens of thousands of soldiers saw the missiles go back and forth, and their faces were suddenly filled with despair. As a spiritual mutant, Professor X instantly sensed the despair and helplessness of these soldiers. He glanced at Magneto. Then he stopped hesitating. He pressed his right hand directly on his temple. Buzz. Magneto, who was concentrating on controlling the missile, felt his consciousness was in a trance, and then he could not control his body at all. Charles, what are you doing? Seeing that he could not control his body, Magneto knew that he was being controlled by Professor X's mental power. His brain was occupied by Professor X's mental consciousness. This made Magneto furious, and he turned his head to ask Professor X's mental consciousness in front of him. Eric, it's not that I'm naive, it's that you are a little too extreme. I won't let you go down the wrong path. After Professor X occupied Magneto's brain, he began to control the missiles in the air while talking to Magneto. All the missiles hovered in the air again. My thoughts are extreme. Charles, you should have seen what happened to me in my childhood. My childhood was miserable. However, you clearly saw what happened to me. You know how humans treat mutants. But you chose to turn a blind eye. Charles, no, Professor X. Now tell me, whose thoughts are extreme? Magneto was so angry that he laughed at Professor X. He was angry that Professor X turned a blind eye to his experience. The various inhumane studies that humans did on mutants were selectively forgotten by Professor X. Professor X forgot Raven's miserable childhood, forgot what happened to Silver Fox Kayla and Toad at the Trask Institute. He even forgot that humans once discriminated against and hated mutants. Professor X only chooses what he wants to see. Eric, Professor X's face was full of bitterness. He was about to speak when he was rudely interrupted by Magneto. Call me Magneto. Magneto's words struck Professor X like lightning. From Magneto's heart, Professor X felt Magneto's complete disappointment in him. The relationship that had just eased a little. It broke down completely at this moment. Hey, Professor X sighed, but said nothing more. Although the two are good friends, they have different ideas and are destined not to be together. The honeymoon period of Professor X and Magneto is completely over. Not far from the battlefield, Brian, who turned into a spiritual consciousness and entered the invisible state, watched with relish. In fact, Brian had expected that the two would have such a scene. As the saying goes, people with different paths cannot work together. Originally, I wanted Blood-Eye Kate to send the energy of these missiles to Black Emperor Shao, but I didn't expect that it would cause Professor X and Magneto to break up. It's really a pleasant surprise. Yes, the reason why the Red Devil took Blood-Eye Kate to control the warships in the Cuban waters. It was because of Brian's order. Originally, Brian was going to send these missiles to Black Emperor Shao for him to absorb, but he unexpectedly saw the famous scene of Professor X and Magneto breaking up. Just right. While Professor X and Magneto are paying attention to each other, I can take the opportunity to harvest the mutant ability. Brian glanced at Professor X and Magneto. Then the mind consciousness quickly fell in front of the dead Ursa Major. Brian made a casual stroke. Ursa Major's mind was opened. A few seconds later, Brian had obtained Ursa Major's ability and one-click maxed it out. Giant Bear Transformation. Brian can switch between human form and giant bear form at will. It is also possible to transform only part of the giant bear's body. Just like now, Brian raised his hand. His right hand swelled at a speed visible to the naked eye. The muscles swelled rapidly, and an extremely thick meat pad appeared in the palm of his hand, and then countless brown hairs covered his palm. In the blink of an eye, his right hand turned into a thick bear paw. Brian's mind moved, and his head instantly turned into a giant head, and his height also expanded to 5 meters in an instant. He became a huge bear that was as huge as a meat mountain. Just standing there was full of oppression. Its strength, defense, and recovery. It is 5 times that of the Ursa Major. If Brian's super strength is taken into account, Brian estimated that his slap could easily knock down a skyscraper. Such power can be called the Godzilla of the mutant universe. Brian just casually looked at his giant bear body. Then he turned back into a human. He glanced at the body of the Ursa Major, and then ignored it. No one would care about a corpse. Even Professor X would not pay any more attention to the dead mutant. After obtaining the Ursa Major ability, Brian found Mutant Claude's body. Then he did the same thing. He obtained Claude's Earthquake ability again. Under the one-click full level, Brian only needs to step on the ground lightly to create a strong earthquake. Moreover, he can release the ground vibe through his fists, and he can control the direction of the ground vibe at will. He can create a maximum earthquake of magnitude 9. As for Claude's ability, it can only create strong earthquakes, but it is not immune to strong earthquakes. For Brian, who has a pseudo-steel body, this is not a big deal. After obtaining Claude's ability, Brian stepped on the ground lightly with his right foot. A ground vibe was released. The ground under Claude collapsed silently, buried Claude directly. Claude's ability is very suitable for burying people. Brian was full of smiles. He was very satisfied with the earthquake ability he obtained. Let's not talk about anything else. The earthquake ability is really suitable for burying people. Brian stepped on the ground again with his right foot. The ground beneath the Ursa Major collapsed instantly, burying the Ursa Major. The X-Men heard the sound of the ground collapsing, and they looked in the direction of the sound, and immediately saw the scene of the Ursa Major being submerged by the collapsed ground. The X-Men just took a look and didn't care. The entire island became full of collapses and cracks because of Claude's ability. The collapse of the ground where the Ursa Major was located was not something worth thinking about. Their attention was now on Professor X and Magneto. Professor X, Magneto. Beast Hank wanted to persuade him. Shut up, Bigfoot. Shut up, Hank. Professor X and Magneto said in unison. Beast Hank shut up decisively. Let me go, Professor X. Magneto glared at Professor X. Definitely, Magneto, I will let you go. But you need to promise me that you will not attack those warships again. Professor X put his right hand on his temple and said righteously. Looking at Professor X in such a posture, Magneto just sneered. Throw. You will reap what you sow, Professor X. Seeing Magneto give in, Professor X gave up his mind control of Magneto. Magneto snorted coldly. Then he took back his ability. Boom, boom, boom. After losing Magneto's control, all the missiles collided with each other and exploded. Balls of firelight shone on the faces of Magneto and Professor X. The two said nothing. They just watched the explosions in the sky silently. Bang! Just when Magneto and Professor X were silent and the atmosphere was heavy, a ball of red mist instantly appeared in front of Magneto. The moment he saw the red mist appear, Magneto subconsciously wanted to dodge. But after seeing Professor X, Magneto gave up the idea of dodge. The Red Devil instantly appeared in front of him. Bang! The Red Devil's body flashed in front of the X-Men and then disappeared again. And Magneto disappeared with the Red Devil. Magneto was captured by the Red Devil. Cyclops Scott said with a shocked face. Professor X just glanced at the red mist in front of him. Then he sighed again. How could Professor X not know what Magneto was thinking? Magneto was voluntarily captured by the Red Devil. Apparently, because Professor X stopped Magneto, Magneto was dissatisfied. So, when the Red Devil appeared, he let the Red Devil capture him. As for whether Magneto would be killed by the Red Devil, Professor X was not worried at all. If Magneto was killed by the Red Devil, he would not be Magneto. Let Magneto vent in this way. Professor X was very tolerant when dealing with Magneto. And after Magneto was taken away by the Red Devil, the next second, the members of the Hellfire Club returned to the island again. And this time, Bloody Kate's right hand had touched Magneto's face. Magneto, now tell these X-Men who you are fighting for now. Bloody Kate stood beside Magneto and said to him very proudly. The X-Men said, I fight for Hellfire. Magneto said mechanically. After that, Magneto said to Professor X without any apology, I'm sorry, Professor X. I was controlled by Bloody Kate. Hearing Magneto's insincere explanation, Professor X's eyes twitched slightly. If Magneto didn't volunteer, how could Bloody Kate approach Magneto and control him? Obviously, to vent his dissatisfaction, Magneto temporarily turned against Hellfire. He joined the camp of Hellfire Club. Magneto, I hope you can realize your mistakes after venting. Professor X was also very tolerant of Magneto's temporary betrayal. Professor X only hoped that Magneto could reconcile with him after venting his dissatisfaction and anger, even return to the past. However, Professor X's wish was doomed to fail. Magneto, kill those disgusting X-Men. Bloody Kate gave the order directly. 1.6, definitely, I am happy with it. Magneto smiled. He raised his right hand. The nuclear submarine wreckage behind him flew towards the X-Men. Boom. Facing huge amounts of nuclear submarine wreckage, Shockwave Alex and Cyclops Scott released energy shockwave and laser lasers at the same time. Two red energy beams split the attacking nuclear submarine wreckage into two. Roar. Wolverine Logan, who had been playing soy sauce just now, roared at this moment, and his claws popped out, flying down to Magneto at a rapid speed. Magneto just glanced at Wolverine Logan indifferently. Then he opened his right hand. Metal spikes pierced into Wolverine Logan's body in an instant. Magneto raised his hand again, and Wolverine Logan, who was flying towards him, suddenly floated in front of Magneto. Logan, you will never be able to defeat me. Magneto raised his hand again, and Wolverine Logan flew backwards. Magneto versus Wolverine Logan. Wolverine Logan was defeated. Plop. Wolverine Logan's body was thrown directly into the sea by Magneto. Gulp. With the sound of drowning, Wolverine Logan's consciousness blurred instantly. After a brief appearance, Wolverine Logan regretfully withdrew from the first battle of Mutant. Tisk, Magneto is really a perfect match for Wolverine Logan. Brian looked at the result of this battle and couldn't help but marvel. Whether it is now or in the future, Magneto is Wolverine Logan's natural enemy. The ability to manipulate metal completely defeats Wolverine Logan. X-Men, prepare for battle. Knock out Magneto. Seeing Wolverine Logan offline, Professor X frowned and gave an order. Chapter 82. X-Men, prepare for battle. Target, Magneto. On the island. Because Magneto turned against them at the last minute, the situation has changed dramatically. Now, the battle with the Hellfire Club is over. The battle with Magneto is about to begin. X-Men versus Magneto. This is a rare scene. How could Brian miss such a scene? He has now successively obtained the giant bear transformation of the Ursa Major of the Hellfire Club, and the earthquake ability of Mutant Claude. Now only Sabretooth Victor's self-healing factor is left, and Ryan has not obtained it yet. So, before watching the show, Brian came to Sabretooth Victor. At this moment, the wound on Sabretooth Victor's forehead, pierced by Magneto's coin, has completely healed. Brian casually cut Sabretooth Victor's forehead with psychokinesis. Under the effect of the self-healing factor, Sabretooth Victor's injuries have completely healed. However, it seems to be due to brain damage. Sabretooth Victor fell into a coma and did not wake up. However, this made it easier for Brian to obtain Sabretooth Victor's self-healing factor. Brian observed Sabretooth Victor's brain. His brain was like a very simple mechanical structure diagram. Brian easily found Sabretooth Victor's brain circuit. In an instant, Brian had obtained Sabretooth's ability. Sabretoothization, bloodthirsty instinct, self-healing factor. Brian did not care about Sabretooth's other abilities, because whether it was Sabretoothization or bloodthirsty instinct, they were just super variants. They did not have much potential. What Sabretooth Victor showed was the final form of these abilities. What really concerned Brian was Sabretooth Victor's self-healing factor ability. What surprised Brian was that self-healing factor also had levels. Self-healing factors are divided into body level, cell level, and immortal level. This is the setting of this book. Please don't criticize. Body level self-healing factors can perfectly self-heal all injuries of the body. But if the cells in the body disintegrate, the self-healing factors cannot be cured. This is why the future William Stryker did not choose Sabretooth Victor as the experimental subject of the X-Weapon plan. Because Sabretooth Victor's self-healing factor cannot withstand the dissolution and reintegration of his body cells by adamantium. Moreover, this level of self-healing factor will die directly if the head is cut off. The cell-level self-healing factor can instantly restore all injuries of the body through cell regeneration. Even if the body disintegrates into powder, it can still regenerate a complete body from the cell level. Wolverine Logan has such a self-healing factor. It is also because Wolverine Logan can regenerate cells that he can be tough with Phoenix Jean Grey and crush the mental storm of cell molecules. As for the immortal self-healing factor, the representative figure is Deadpool. Sabretooth Victor's self-healing factor is undoubtedly the worst. Definitely, although Sabretooth Victor's self-healing factor is the worst among the immortal trio, but it can still make Brian immortal. It can be said that after obtaining Sabretooth Victor's self-healing factor, Brian has truly defeated time. He will not age with time. He will remain young until the end of the world. But in order for Brian to truly defeat death, Brian still needs to obtain Wolverine Logan's self-healing factor. Sure enough, when it comes to self-healing factors, Wolverine Logan is the orthodox. Brian glanced in the direction of the Cuban waters. At this moment, Wolverine Logan has broken free from the patch on his body and began to float up. F***K. I really should learn how to swim. Wolverine Logan struggled hard in the sea water and made up his mind to learn how to swim. Brian retracted his gaze. Compared to harvesting Wolverine Logan's self-healing factor, it was more important to watch the show. He had already placed a perception mark on Wolverine Logan. No matter where Wolverine Logan went, Brian could easily find him. It can be said that obtaining Wolverine Logan's self-healing factor is a sure thing. Therefore, Brian was not in a hurry at all. He glanced at Sabretooth Victor. The wound on Sabretooth Victor's forehead had completely self-healed. Brian was in a very happy mood now. Now he didn't even have to deal with the aftermath. Watch the show, watch the show. Brian came to the center of the battlefield invisibly, and then found the best position to watch the show. At this moment, in the center of the battlefield, under the command of Professor X, the X-Men quickly rushed towards the Lord of Magnetics. Magneto just stretched out his hand lightly. Then, they flew back at a faster speed. Facing these X-Men members, Magneto really had no pressure. He even had the leisure to remind Beast Hank, "Hank, remember not to use metal to make X-Battle suits next time." And, to be honest, this X-Battle suit is really ugly. Under Magneto's reminder, all X-Men looked at Beast Hank. Beast Hank's face showed embarrassment. He designed the X-Battle suit carefully. The entire X-Battle suit is made of the special alloy fiber he developed. This not only makes the X-Battle suit have good defensive power, but also very light and close-fitting. Beast Hank could not imagine that his carefully crafted X-Battle suit is now convenient for Magneto. Magneto raised his hand again. All X-Men members, except Professor X, flew into the air. The X-Battle suits on their bodies quickly tightened, and the original battle suits instantly turned into cages. Roar! Beast Hank's face flashed with embarrassment, and then he roared, and his muscles and bones instantly tensed. He wanted to use brute force to break free from the X-Battle suit. However, no matter how hard he tried, he could not break free from the X-Battle suit on his body. Magneto completely ignored Beast Hank. He set his sights on Shockwave Alex and Cyclops Scott. Magneto knew the abilities and weaknesses of the X-Men very well. So, he waved his right hand gently. Shockwave Alex and Cyclops Scott were instantly facing each other, and their X-Battle suits were tightly sucked together. The metal on the ground quickly floated up. It fixed the bodies of the two people and made them unable to move. Now, whether it was Shockwave Alex or Cyclops Scott, neither dared to release their abilities casually. As for the siren, Magneto snapped his fingers lightly, and the siren's mouth was sealed by metal. The battle had just started. The X-Men were already annihilated. Hank, remember to use non-metallic materials next time. Seeing the X-Men's instant defeat, Professor X's eyes twitched slightly. He first complained to Beast Hank. Then he looked at Magneto with a serious face. Magneto, have you vented enough? Professor X's words made Magneto's face suddenly gloomy. In Professor X's opinion, is he fighting against the X-Men just to vent his inner dissatisfaction? It turns out, Professor X, your X-Men are vulnerable. Just like your ideals, they are also vulnerable in the face of absolute strength. Don't be obsessed, Professor X. Humans and mutants can never coexist. This is a war, a racial war. And we mutants are destined to win this war. Magneto opened his hands. His face was extremely calm, and his voice was extremely firm. It's you who is obsessed, Magneto. Professor X sighed helplessly. Neither of them could convince the other. Magneto, don't you believe in power? Then I will use power to defeat you. Let you know that in this world, you can't do whatever you want just because you have strength. Professor X's words stunned Magneto for a moment. Then he looked at Professor X in exasperation. Professor X, my mind has been shielded by Ghost Polly. Your mental power is completely ineffective against me. How can you defeat me? Use your ideals to influence me. At this moment, Magneto was really a little angry. Professor X's words seemed as if he could kill Magneto at any time. How much did Professor X despise him, Magneto, to say such a shameless thing? Especially when Magneto could restrain Professor X's mental power. Looking at the exasperated Magneto, Professor X didn't say anything. He just gently pressed his fingers on his temple. Boom. A mental storm swept down. Everyone, including Brian, was affected by this terrifying mental storm. The original island disappeared instantly. Instead, there was another scene. All mutants were instantly in a world of nuclear wasteland. The sky was gray. The radioactive dust produced by the nuclear explosion was scattered everywhere. It made it difficult to breathe. The ground was full of bones, and the entire city had become ruins. In the ruins of the city, Brian keenly saw a familiar building. It was Xavier Manor. However, at this moment, Xavier Manor had completely turned into ruins. On the ruins, several familiar figures were lying on the ground in a mess, with blood flowing on their bodies. These people were the current members of the X-Men. However, they have now become corpses. They can't be deader. Welcome to my spiritual fantasy. In the ruins, a corpse suddenly crawled up. This corpse was Professor X. Magneto looked at everything in front of him in astonishment. For a moment, his eyes widened and he couldn't react at all. He turned his head and looked around. Everything in front of him was as real as if it was reality. He could smell the strong smell of sulfur in the air and the unique smell of nuclear radiation dust. He could feel the burning sensation on his skin. He could feel the reality of the ground under his feet. Everything in front of him was so real. Professor X, what did you do to me? Magneto's face changed drastically. He looked at Professor X in front of him and asked angrily, Magneto, didn't you ask me to study how to use my ability when my ability was blocked? Now I think of it, I don't need to invade your brain at all. I just need to use my telepathy power to build a bridge between you and me. Then, let go of my brain, and you will see what I see, what I hear, and what I feel. And what I fear. I call it the illusion of the mind. Professor X talked freely. This is indeed the most suitable fighting method that Professor X found after thinking hard. Professor X gave up the violent mind invasion method. Instead, he adopted a very gentle method, using the power of telepathy to build a channel between his own spiritual world and the other party's spiritual consciousness. And Professor X only needs to manipulate this spiritual channel. You can pull the other person's mind into your own mind world. This is not mind invasion. It's a kind of telepathy, or it should be called mind sharing. As a level 5 mind mutant, the mind illusion created by Professor X is more real than the real world. Moreover, in the mental illusion, Professor X can use the power of the mind to subtly influence the brain of the mental consciousness body. In short, if you get hurt in the mental illusion, your body in the real world will also show symptoms of injury. If you die in the mental illusion, your body in the real world will be brain dead. Mind illusion? I have to say, the professor really brought me some surprises. Brian was in a mind illusion. Because Professor X opened his mind world, he could clearly perceive Professor X's thoughts. He could also feel that everything in this mind illusion was the most fearful scene in Professor X's heart. Brian looked at Professor X. It should be said that Professor X was timid when facing other people. But when facing Magneto, he punched hard. Just as Brian was looking at the mind illusion in front of him, a sonic boom sounded. Then a figure wearing Homelander uniform and Red Star cape slammed in front of Magneto. Brian. Magneto looked at the figure in front of him, and his face changed. Even Brian was attracted. So the boss is me? Looking at this, Homelander Brian, who stood proudly in front of Magneto, like Superman, Brian's eyes twitched slightly. He didn't expect that Professor X was most afraid of himself. With Professor Brian, who was connected to Professor X's mind, could clearly perceive why Professor X was afraid of him. As Brian grew rapidly, Professor X gradually began to worry. He was afraid that Brian would become another Black Emperor Shao, even stronger than Black Emperor Shao. This was not Professor X's unfounded worry. It was because Brian's style of doing things was reckless. This made Professor X very uneasy. This uneasiness, over time, turned into fear. Brian became Professor X's nightmare. It was lingering. Even every night when Professor X woke up from his dreams, he would be awakened by the nightmare of Homelander Brian slaughtering the world. Professor X, you actually think of me like this? Brian's dissatisfied voice appeared in Professor X's brain. In the real world, Professor X pressed his right hand on his temple with a bitter smile on his face. The thing he feared most was seen by the real owner. It made Professor X a little embarrassed. However, this was his truest thought. Professor X could not deny it. Compared to apologizing to Brian, he felt that it was more important to defeat Magneto. He wanted to make Magneto, seeing that this world is not about strength. At the same time, Professor X also wanted to vent the frustration of being targeted during this period. He wanted to prove to the X-Men. He, Professor X, was still a powerful psychic mutant. He was a qualified leader of the X-Men. Magneto, feel the terror from the psychic mutant. Professor X's face was serious, and then his consciousness began to concentrate on controlling the psychic illusion. Boom. In the psychic illusion, Homelander's cloak moved automatically without wind. Just standing there, a strong aura spread instantly. Under Magneto's gaze, his eyes instantly emitted a red light. Boom. A red laser instantly knocked Magneto out. After knocking Magneto out, Homelander jumped above Magneto, then raised his right fist and smashed it down heavily. Boom. Magneto was blasted into the ground, creating a crater. Above the crater, Homelander held a huge rock in both hands and smashed it down. F***KU. Looking at the huge rock coming, Magneto couldn't help but swear. Chapter 83. In the Mental Illusion. Brian looked at Homelander, who was as cold and robot-like as he was, with great interest. As the source of Professor X's fear, Homelander possessed many of Brian's abilities. Cyclops. Flight. Four-winged angel form. Super strength. Infinitely adaptable body. Psychokinesis control. Energy shockwave. Although this was not all of Brian's power, it was enough to easily beat Magneto. At this moment, Under Brian's gaze, Homelander held a rock as big as a hill in both hands. His eyes glowed with red light. He was staring at Magneto coldly and ruthlessly, and then threw the rock in his hand down. Facing such a huge rock, F***KU. Professor X, UB***CH. Magneto only had time to swear. Then he had to roar, "Red Devil, help quickly." Professor X's mind illusion is a large-scale mind sharing. Not only Magneto entered Professor X's mind illusion, all X-Men, and the only 3 remaining members of the Hellfire Club, all entered Professor X's mind illusion. Even Brian, who had been watching the show in stealth, was pulled in. That's why, when facing Homelander's attack in the mind illusion, he did not release his ability. Instead, he asked the Red Devil for help. Magneto knew very well that Homelander in front of him was too strong, especially Homelander's super strength, which he could not fight at all. So, instead of fighting Homelander, it is better to directly knock down Professor X in the mind illusion. Bang! As Magneto asked for help, a ball of red mist suddenly appeared in front of him. Then the Red Devil took Magneto away from the deep pit. Boom! After Magneto left, rocks weighing hundreds of tons suddenly fell down. The whole ground shook violently. The place where Magneto was originally located completely turned into a huge pit with a diameter of 20 meters. "Brian, is there any way to deal with this Homelander?" The Red Devil appeared in front of Brian, who had been watching the show with Magneto. In fact, after entering the mental illusion, Brian lifted his invisibility. After all, this is Professor X's mental illusion. No matter how Brian is invisible, Professor X can perceive Brian's existence. Moreover, everyone in the mental illusion is in the state of mental consciousness. Brian's mental consciousness is not abrupt. In this case, why hide the body? Just watch the show openly. Yes. Facing Magneto's inquiry, Brian said with a smile on his face. What method? Magneto was full of expectations. After all, the people of the country were based on Brian. Brian definitely knew Homelander's weaknesses. As long as you are stronger than him, you can easily beat Homelander. Just like this, Brian said as his body floated up and rushed towards the oncoming group. Boom. The two collided at supersonic speed, and then each raised their fists and smashed the other directly. Boom. Brian punched Homelander hundreds of meters away, and then directly knocked down several buildings in succession, and the group finally stopped. Brian, on the other hand, was unscathed. Gift crap. Seeing Brian punched such a powerful Homelander away, Magneto and others suddenly widened their eyes. They couldn't believe it. Homelander was so strong that they were a little powerless. Unexpectedly, Homelander was as weak as a child in front of Brian. Homelander was created by Professor X subconsciously based on me, because he has never fought with me. So Professor X can only imagine how powerful I am. And the fact proves that Professor X can't imagine how powerful I am. Brian was suspended in the air, and the red star cape on his body moved without wind, showing his invincibility. Swoosh! Homelander, who was knocked away by Brian, flew back again, still expressionless, as cold as a robot. Brian really had no interest in paying attention to this imposter. His body landed on the ground, and then patted Magneto on the shoulder. "The king has been handed over to you. Now it's up to you." Brian's words made Magneto frown slightly. "Brian, don't you want to kill your imposter?" Originally, Magneto was a little excited when he saw Brian knock Homelander away, but he didn't expect that he would have to face this Homelander himself in the end. "This is a matter between you and Professor X. I won't interfere. As for the account between me and Professor X, I will settle it with him personally." Brian shrugged, and then looked at Professor X calmly for 10 times. Professor X smiled bitterly. He knew that because of his opinion of Brian, that made Brian alienated from him. Professor X was a little sad about the rift with Magneto, but after the rift with Brian, Professor X was full of crisis. Because, from the beginning to the end, he had never really trusted Brian. After opening his heart, Professor X knew very well that Brian already knew his distrust of him. He didn't know what Brian would do. So, this made Professor X even more uneasy. He glanced at Magneto and was not going to play house with her anymore. Boom. Following Professor X's thoughts, Homelander's eyes suddenly lit up again. Then Homelander stretched out his right hand, and Magneto's body flew backwards. At the moment when Magneto's body flew backwards, Homelander had appeared behind him and punched him again. Boom. Magneto was like a missile, crashing into two buildings in succession before finally stopping. There is no doubt that Magneto was beaten by Professor X's mental illusion Homelander, just like he easily beat the X-Men. Facing Professor X's heavy punch, Magneto was completely powerless to fight back. If Professor X hadn't used his mental power to protect Magneto's mental consciousness, Magneto would have been seriously injured and dying just from the attack. IZI. Magneto had just gotten up when the body of the Homelander was already suspended in front of Magneto. His eyes were red, and his chest was shining with dazzling energy. F***K, Professor X, UB***CH. Are you going to kill me? Seeing Homelander about to attack, Magneto was completely broken. He cursed at Professor X on the side. As Magneto cursed, Homelander's attack stopped. Magneto, I hope you can remember the lesson of this failure. This world is not about strength. Professor X, who taught Magneto a lesson, smiled. Homelander in front of Magneto suddenly spoke up and said earnestly, "You are the boss, you have the final say." Magneto's face was extremely gloomy. However, the winners are the losers. Professor X defeated himself, and Magneto had nothing to say now. Magneto's surrender made Professor X feel very happy. He turned his head and looked at the Hellfire Club members beside him. Boom. The laser that Homelander had prepared suddenly changed direction, and two lasers instantly pierced through the bodies of Blood-Eye Kate and Ghost Polly. At the same time, the energy shockwave on Homelander's chest was aimed at the Red Devil. However, the moment the energy shockwave hit the Red Devil had already turned into red mist and disappeared. Professor X frowned slightly, and the Red Devil's teleportation made him feel powerless. Then he looked at Blood-Eye Kate and Ghost Polly. Blood-Eye Kate died instantly after being hit by the laser. And with the death of her spiritual consciousness, her body in the real world also instantly became brain dead. Compared to Blood-Eye Kate, Ghost Polly did not die immediately. The ability of spiritual protection prevented Ghost Polly's spiritual consciousness from dying. But the light of his soul deep in his heart became dimmer and dimmer. Feeling the change in his own spiritual light, Ghost Polly began to lie. He knew very well that once the light of his soul completely disappeared, he would die without a burial place. Professor X, I surrender, I surrender. Ghost Polly decisively chose to surrender. However, facing Ghost Polly's surrender, Professor X was unmoved. Although Professor X was kind, indecisive, and insisted on his principles. But sometimes, Professor X's principles were also very flexible. Ghost Polly's ability was very restraining to Professor X. So, as early as the beginning, Professor X sentenced Ghost Polly to death. Others can live, but Ghost Polly must die. So, no matter how Ghost Polly begged for mercy, Professor X just looked at Ghost Polly with a little indifference, and then Homelander released a laser, piercing Ghost Polly again. Ghost Polly, in the humble begging for mercy, the light of the soul was exhausted. Then he died and could not die again. Swish. With the death of Ghost Polly, Professor X directly closed his spiritual world. The spiritual illusion in front of him disappeared instantly. Everyone returned to reality again. Magneto let go of the X-Men. One after returning to the real world, Professor X also put down his right hand. He looked at Magneto opposite him with a smile on his face and said calmly, "Humph." Magneto snorted with a very ugly expression, but still listened to Professor X's advice and waved his hand to let go of the X-Men members. Bang, bang, bang. With a series of dull landing sounds, the X-Men who were bound in the air by Magneto regained their freedom. Cyclops Scott and Shockwave Alex, grinning, climbed up from the ground and glared at Magneto. Beast Hank was thick-skinned and didn't suffer any damage from falling from midair, but he still roared at Magneto with some anger. Since then, only the X-Men members were left on the entire island, and the last member of the Hellfire Club, Red Devil. The battle between the X-Men and the Hellfire Club came to an end, especially after Ghost Polly's death. The mental shield in the Red Devil's mind disappeared. This allowed Professor X to control the Red Devil at will. Well, you X-Men won. Seeing the X-Men regroup, Red Devil took out a cigar from his pocket and lit it, then teleported to Brian's side, put his right hand on Brian's shoulder, and then said faintly, By the way, I am Brian's undercover in the Hellfire Club. X-Men, Magneto, Professor X. Professor X and others were confused at this moment. Then Professor X directly used his spiritual power and began to read Red Devil's memory. At the third port of Miami, when the X-Men faced the Hellfire Club for the first time. After Brian beat Red Devil, he invited Red Devil. Red Devil, there is no future for you to follow Black Emperor Shao, so come with me. The Red Devil used up his last strength and responded to Brian. I, the Red Devil Azazo, am willing to follow you. Mr. Brian, welcome to join. Now, you go back to Black Emperor Shao and report to me at any time about Black Emperor Zhao's movements. Black Emperor Shao just recruited a Soviet mutant, and the strength of Hellfire has become stronger. Pictures flashed in front of Professor X. Professor X found that there were very few pictures of Red Devil and Brian, only 2 pictures. One was to tell Brian that Black Emperor Shao recruited Ursa Major. The other was to tell Brian that Black Emperor Shao needed 6 hours to absorb the nuclear energy of the nuclear power room. And Brian confidently said that 6 hours was enough time for the X-Men to kill the members of the Hellfire Club. As for the others, Professor X did not see it. This is definitely because of Brian's brain occlusion. As early as when the Red Devil teleported in front of Brian and put his right hand on Brian's shoulder, he used brain occlusion on the Red Devil. All the conversations between him and Red Devil were sealed in the depths of Red Devil's heart. Only memories that Professor X would not doubt were left to prove the authenticity of Red Devil's words. Everything was under Brian's control, including Red Devil's undercover self-explosion. After checking Red Devil's memory, Professor X nodded seriously to Magneto and others. Red Devil is indeed Brian's undercover planted next to Black Emperor Shao. Under Professor X's endorsement, Red Devil's undercover identity was completely confirmed. The X-Men, who were originally on edge, relaxed immediately. They glanced at Red Devil, their eyes full of recognition. Obviously, Red Devil's undercover identity made the X-Men regard Red Devil as their own. Brian, how many things do you have to hide from us? Professor X looked at Brian with a complicated expression and said in a deep voice, Professor X, didn't you also hide your distrust of me? In your mind, shouldn't I be like this, good? A behind-the-scenes boss with ulterior motives. Brian shrugged and said calmly. Professor X was speechless after being confronted by Brian. Okay, now that the Hellfire Club has been solved, we only have one target left. That is Black Emperor Shao. Professor X was silent for a moment, then spoke. Now, the Hellfire Club has completely disappeared with the Red Devil's self-explosion. The Hellfire Club has completely become history. Now, there is only one enemy left for the X-Men. That is, Black Emperor Shao. Everyone's eyes turned to the direction of the nuclear power room. Only Brian raised his left hand and glanced at his Rolex watch. I have some bad news for you. Brian's words attracted everyone's attention. It has been 6 hours since Black Emperor Shao entered the nuclear power room. Brian's words made everyone's face change drastically. They all looked towards the nuclear power room. Boom. As if to verify Brian's words, the heavy lead door of the nuclear power room exploded. Then, Black Emperor Shao strode out. Black Emperor Shao, who had just walked out, was surrounded by layers of energy. It was as if he was covered with a layer of golden light claws. His eyes were shining with golden light. The huge energy field contained in Black Emperor Zhao's body made his feet leave the ground. At this moment, Black Emperor Shao seemed to have activated the new star form that only Captain Marvel had. The golden energy all over his body was like a small golden sun. X-Men, did you defeat the members of the Hellfire Club? After coming out, Black Emperor Shao looked around and looked at the members of the Hellfire Club lying in all directions. Black Emperor Zhao's face turned cold. Chapter 84. Black Emperor Shao. On the island, Magneto, who was already depressed, was once again filled with hatred after seeing Black Emperor Shao walking out of the nuclear power room. He roared at Black Emperor Shao angrily. Then he rushed towards Black Emperor Shao. At this moment, Black Emperor Zhao's whole body was surging with layers of energy fields. His whole body was shining with golden light, and the energy in his body was dissipating uncontrollably. The whole person was like a dazzling golden little sun. The surging energy field made his body float uncontrollably. Although Black Emperor Shao absorbed the energy of the nuclear power room and turned himself into a human-shaped self-propelled nuclear bomb. But he still needed time to adapt to these energies before he could completely absorb them. So, although the X-Men killed the members of the Hellfire Club, he was a little angry and surprised. But he was not in a hurry to take action now. Looking at Magneto rushing over, Black Emperor Shao showed a smile on his face. "Little Eric, don't be so stubborn." Because he couldn't perfectly control the energy in his body. Even his voice contained huge energy, making Black Emperor Zhao's voice like the voice of God, instantly covering the island. The sound was even spreading outward. The huge sound shook the water surface, and Wolverine Logan, who was paddling on the water, was directly hit into the water by the waves. And Magneto was directly overturned to the ground by the energy contained in Black Emperor Zhao's voice. Bang! Magneto, who was overturned to the ground, still glared at Black Emperor Shao and raised his hands suddenly. Boom! The nuclear power room behind Black Emperor Shao suddenly crashed into Black Emperor Shao. However, huge amounts of kinetic energy and magnetic energy were lost when the nuclear power room was 5 meters close to Black Emperor Shao. Then it fell heavily on the ground. Eric, when will you understand that in this world, everything is based on strength? Black Emperor Shao slowly floated towards Magneto. The huge energy pushed Black Emperor Zhao's body and quickly approached Magneto. Bang! As Black Emperor Shao approached, a huge energy field instantly enveloped Magneto's body. Under this terrifying energy field, Magneto instantly knelt on the ground. "In my eyes, you are still as weak as a child." Black Emperor Shao slowly fell to the ground, and the golden energy layer on his body slowly disappeared. He turned back from his original state of being like a golden little sun to a flesh and blood body. This is not that Black Emperor Shao has become weaker. It is that Black Emperor Shao has completely controlled the energy in his body and completely absorbed it into the cells. Black Emperor Shao moved his body. Then he walked in front of Magneto's 183. As Black Emperor Shao controlled his energy, the pressure on Magneto disappeared instantly. He quickly stood up and punched Black Emperor Shao on the head. Black Emperor Shao did not dodge Magneto's attack at all, and let Magneto's fist hit his helmet. Black Emperor Shao was unharmed. He just looked at Magneto with some indifference. After seeing Black Emperor Zhao's eyes, Magneto was immediately reminded of his childhood. His originally angry eyes instantly turned into fear and helplessness. At this moment, Magneto seemed to have turned back into the child in the concentration camp. Black Emperor Shao saw the change in Magneto's eyes. Black Emperor Shao smiled. From the curved iron gate all the way, Black Emperor Shao gently patted Magneto's shoulder, with a hint of reminiscence and relief in his tone. "I am proud that you can grow up to this day." After seeing Black Emperor Zhao's relieved eyes, Magneto's heart was moved. His expression was extremely complicated. Magneto had a deep hatred for Black Emperor Shao. But apart from the hatred, Black Emperor Shao was indeed a qualified teacher. Half of the reason why Magneto is so powerful is due to the teachings of Black Emperor Shao. "Go to hell, Black Emperor Shao." Magneto slowly retreated, then opened his hands, and the nuclear power room disintegrated instantly. Countless metal debris rushed towards Black Emperor Shao frantically. However, all the metal debris lost kinetic energy when they were 5 meters away from Black Emperor Shao and fell to the ground. "Eric, you still have a long way to go." Under Magneto's horrified gaze, Black Emperor Shao walked up to Magneto and gently patted Magneto's shoulder. Boom! Magneto was beaten to his knees again. Magneto struggled hard, but Black Emperor Zhao's right hand was like a mountain, making Magneto unable to move at all. "Eric, my most lovely student, I can give you another chance. Child, follow me. Let's rule the world together. We are the future of mankind." Black Emperor Shao invited Magneto again. Black Emperor Shao still valued Magneto's ability very much. He also knew how great Magneto's potential was, especially after the Hellfire Club was annihilated. Black Emperor Shao wanted to recruit Magneto even more. Magneto looked at Black Emperor Shao in silence, and then glanced at Professor X behind Black Emperor Shao. "You're right, Shao. We are the future of mankind. Mutant hail." Dab. Magneto turned against him again and surrendered to Black Emperor Shao. "A wise choice, Eric." Black Emperor Shao patted Magneto's shoulder and pulled him up himself. "Magneto, don't let yourself repeat the same mistakes." Professor X's voice sounded behind Black Emperor Shao. This made Black Emperor Shao frown slightly and turned to look at Professor X. I almost forgot about you, Professor X. Black Emperor Shao looked at Professor X with a smile on his face, then turned to the other Magnet Master and said, Eric, kill him. Hearing Black Emperor Zhao's order, Magneto looked at Professor X with a complicated look. He definitely didn't really surrender to Black Emperor Shao, but he was ready to find an opportunity to take off Black Emperor Zhao's mental protection helmet. So, when facing Black Emperor Zhao's order, Magneto hesitated. His eyes subconsciously looked at Professor X. At the same time, he raised his right hand, and a coin quickly floated up in the palm of his right hand. Do it, Professor. Magneto suddenly sent a telepathic message to Professor X, then turned around abruptly, and the coin instantly attacked Black Emperor Zhao's mental protection helmet. Magneto was ready to use the coin to pierce Black Emperor Zhao's helmet unexpectedly. Then let Professor X use mental power to directly control Black Emperor Shao. Eric, your path is narrow. Faced with Magneto's attack, Black Emperor Zhao's face turned cold. He raised his hand instantly and slapped the coin that Magneto attacked. The huge energy instantly changed the direction of the coin. In Professor X's horrified eyes, the coin, at an extremely fast speed, passed through the center of Professor X's forehead and then drilled out from the back of his head. DBA. The pain of the coin piercing the brain tissue made Professor X scream sharply. Charles. Magneto looked at Professor X, whose brain was pierced by his own coin, with a look of astonishment on his face. Magneto was extremely angry. He roared. All the metal on the entire island attacked Black Emperor Shao. Behind Magneto, Cyclops Scott and others were also extremely angry. They watched Professor X fall in front of them. The young X-Men immediately began to attack Black Emperor Shao regardless of anything. Cyclops Scott released a laser as thick as an arm. Shockwave Alex even released a huge energy directly from his chest. Shockwave. As for the siren, it screamed and rushed directly towards Black Emperor Eyebrow. Facing the attack of the X-Men, Black Emperor Shao just sneered. All the attacks lost their energy when they were 5 meters away from Black Emperor Shao. The attacks of Cyclops and Shockwave were directly drained of energy. The two of them collapsed to the ground in an instant because their energy was drained, unable to fight again. Looking at the siren flying in the sky, Black Emperor Shao raised his hand and threw an energy ball at it. The siren had no time to dodge and was hit by the energy ball. The huge energy contained in the energy ball directly enveloped the siren and then exploded. The siren screamed and was instantly blown into a bloody mess. It fell directly from the sky and hit the ground heavily. As for Magneto, Black Emperor Shao jumped lightly and appeared in front of Magneto. Then, in Magneto's horrified eyes, Black Emperor Shao slapped Magneto away with a slap. Boom. Magneto seemed to be hit by a high-speed train, and his whole body was immediately covered with blood. At least dozens of bones in his body were broken. The whole person collapsed to the ground, and he had no strength to fight anymore. Beast Hank, who was charging towards Black Emperor Shao, stopped with fear on his face when he saw Black Emperor Shao defeat Magneto and the other four in an instant. F***K, Brian, why don't you do it? Magneto collapsed to the ground. He tried to raise his head and looked in Brian's direction and couldn't help cursing. Why are you panicking? I'm here, you'll die. Brian walked to Magneto and threw Magneto to Beast Hank, who was not far away with psychokinesis. Just as Brian said, the god blood ability he possessed could easily turn dead man into flesh and bones. As long as he was not blown to pieces by Black Emperor Shao, Brian could be saved. So, Brian was not in a hurry at all. Let these X-Men experience what despair is first. Only in this way can the X-Men face the next nuclear explosion calmly. After all, Brian didn't want to fight the nuclear explosion with these X-Men when Black Emperor Shao exploded. Although Brian could be safe and sound under the nuclear explosion, but the X-Men might be blown to pieces by Black Emperor Shao. That would be a complete annihilation. It doesn't matter if the others died, but Professor X and Magneto died, which was not worth it for Brian. After all, Professor X and Magneto were the leaders of mutant. They were also the core of the mutant universe. Once the two died, who knows if those big mutant events would happen again. Brian would never allow Professor X and his men to die in a nuclear explosion. That's why Brian didn't intervene when Black Emperor Shaw easily defeated the X-Men. Professor X's brain was pierced, which Brian didn't expect. At this moment, after letting this group of X-Men experience the unparalleled power of Black Emperor Shaw, Brian stood up. "Brian, you are not my opponent." He Huang Shao also saw Brian. At this moment, He Huang Shao was extremely confident. He did feel that Brian's ability was very tricky before, but now he has unmatched energy. He is confident that he will never be able to fight Brian on equal terms. Boom. Brian squatted slightly, and then the whole person crashed into He Huang Shao at supersonic speed. The battle instantly became white-hot. Bang! Brian instantly came in front of He Huang Shao, then clenched his right fist, and super strength burst out. Boom! The terrifying power directly knocked He Huang Zhao's body back a few steps. However, the power that was enough to collapse a skyscraper only made He Huang Shao retreat a few steps. He Huang Shao was unscathed. Brian raised his eyebrows, having expected such a thing. Brian's body floated up, and then countless variant abilities were released. Boom! A huge amount of tornadoes swept out, and He Huang Shao was shrouded in it. At the same time, psychokinesis formed a storm, and the whole earth shook. Huge rocks rose from the ground. Brian was suspended in the air, waving his right hand, and all the boulders hit Black Emperor Shao at a very fast speed. Boom, boom, doctor. A series of huge amounts of roars sounded. All the attacks submerged Black Emperor Shao. The entire island stirred up dust. And in the dust, Black Emperor Mai Fufa strode out unscathed. Classic smoke without injury. Black Emperor Shao exerted a little force on his feet, and the whole person rushed into the sky in an instant. Then he punched Brian. Brian's body was like a meteor, directly hitting the ground from a high altitude. The kinetic energy attached to Black Emperor Zhao's punch was enough to collapse several buildings. The entire ground was smashed into a deep pit by the momentum attached to Brian. A ball of explosion flames burned fiercely. However, Black Emperor Shao did not show any joy. His brows were tightly furrowed. In the explosion flames, Brian walked out. At the moment of Black Emperor Zhao's attack, the adaptive evolution ability allowed Brian to evolve into a new form instantly. At this moment, Brian's muscles bulged all over his body, like a diamond rock. On the purple skin, there were complex and cool inscriptions. This is the new form that Brian has evolved. Brian calls it Thanos form, because Brian looks exactly like Thanos at this moment, except for the lack of vertical lines on his chin. Purple skin has terrifying defensive power, especially the defensive power against energy attacks. Brian is now completely immune to the energy attack of Black Emperor Shao. After Brian evolved into Thanos form, adaptive evolution solidified this form into an inscription. Brian can freely activate Thanos form. Black Emperor Shao, come again. Brian flew towards Black Emperor Shao again. The huge kinetic energy directly brought Black Emperor Shao down from a high altitude to the ground. Boom. Black Emperor Zhao's body hit the ground heavily, and Brian's attack had just begun. Bang, bang, bang. Brian clenched his fists, super strength and vibe, and attacked Black Emperor Shao crazily. With Brian's attack, the whole island shook violently. K die. Black Emperor Shao released a terrifying nuclear shockwave from his chest, directly knocking Brian out. However, in the Thanos form, Kai-In was unharmed. Black Emperor Shao also stood up from the ground. The two fought fiercely. However, as the only BUG-level mutant of this era, the battle between the two was still smoke without injury. Neither could beat the other. Brian almost released his ability once, whether it was psychokinesis, tornado, sound wave, earthquake, super strength, etc., Black Emperor Shao could absorb it. And Brian was also immune to Black Emperor Zhao's energy attack. The two sides were still evenly matched. So, after fighting for 10 minutes, the two stopped at the same time. Red Devil. Black Emperor Shao turned his head and looked at the Red Devil on the side. He didn't know that the Red Devil was Brian's undercover. Brian sent a sound wave to the Red Devil that only he could hear. Red Devil glanced at Brian obscurely, then teleported to Black Emperor Shao. Take me to New York. Black Emperor Shao looked at Brian deeply, then gave the Red Devil an order. Bang! Red Devil grabbed Black Emperor Zhao's shoulder, and then the two disappeared in the red mist. Black Emperor Zhao went to New York, and Brian also came to the X-Men. How is Professor X? Brian walked to Beast Hank and patted Beast Hank's shoulder gently. I have injected Professor X with a healing potion, but for some reason, Professor X has not been able to wake up. Chapter 85. Brian, how is Professor X? On the island, the Battle of Mutant has completely ended. The whole island is in ruins. Magneto came to Brian with a worried look on his face. Looking at the unconscious Professor X, his face was full of self-blame. The healing potion developed by Beast Hank has cured Professor X's brain, but so far, Professor X is still in a coma. Brian gently patted Magneto's shoulder and briefly explained Professor X's situation. Hearing that Professor X was just unconscious, Magneto breathed a sigh of relief. Then Magneto raised his right hand, and Professor X's body instantly floated up. Let's go see Beast Hank and the others," Brian said to Magneto casually, and then came to Beast Hank. At this moment, Beast Hank, Cyclops Scott, and Shockwave Alex looked at the body of the Siren Sean Cassidy with a heavy face. "I'm sorry, Siren. I only have the last 2 healing potions left. Please forgive my selfishness. Professor X and Magneto really can't die." Beast Hank also looked at the body of the Siren with self-blame and said with extreme guilt. When Brian and Black Emperor Shaw were fighting, Beast Hank weighed the pros and cons and used the only 2 healing potions on Professor X and Magneto. Siren Sean Cassidy also died due to serious injuries, although this was not Beast Hank's fault. However, Beast Hank always felt that he had killed Siren with his own hands. This made him feel full of guilt and self-blame for Siren's death. At this moment, Beast Hank began to hate himself, which made him unable to let go for a long time. "Siren, you are an excellent X-Men member and a hero," Shockwave Alex said with a sad face. He still remembers the days of training and growing up with Siren. Brian manipulated the metal fragments beside him and made a metal coffin for Siren. Beast Hank put Siren into the metal coffin with a sad face. Then, under the gaze of all X-Men, Beast Hank directly carried the metal coffin. "Hank, do you need help?" Magneto glanced at Beast Hank and asked. "No, Magneto. I want to send Siren off personally." Beast Hank refused Magneto's help. Then he left the island step by step. America's warships had been waiting for a long time. A few minutes later, a supersonic fighter took off from the America warship and disappeared into the clouds. After Brian and others left. In the devastated island, Sabretooth Victor, who was originally thought to be dead, slowly opened his eyes. Roar. Self-healing factor repaired his brain, but it could not repair his damaged memory. Who am I? Where am I? Jimmy, where is Jimmy? Sabretooth Victor sat up, looking around with a confused face, and the unfamiliar environment in front of him made him extremely panic. Sabretooth Victor lost his memory. He now only has the memory of escaping from the manor and wandering together with his younger brother James when he was a child. As for who he is and where this place is, who is Jimmy? He knows nothing. He only remembers his younger brother, James. Roar. The confusion in the brain and the panic of being in an unfamiliar environment made Sabretooth Victor's claws popped out instantly. What is this? Looking at the claws on his hands, Sabretooth Victor panicked even more. He fumbled around on his body and found a dog tag around his neck. Sabretooth Victor tore the dog tag off with a little force. Looking at the Sabretooth on it, Sabretooth took it as his own name. I am Sabretooth. Sabretooth stood up and let out a heavy tiger roar. He quickly landed on all fours and left the island quickly. Although he had lost his memory, the bloodthirsty instincts he had cultivated for 200 years still made him a level 4 mutant. In fact, because of the loss of memory, the current Sabretooth Victor has become more beastly. His image gradually overlapped with the future Sabretooth who followed Magneto. Wolterfake, where am I swimming to? Is this the same island where we fought before? Where are the X-Men? Where are the members of the Hellfire Club? Why can't I see anyone here? It wasn't until 2 minutes after Sabretooth Victor left the island that Wolverine Logan finally climbed onto the island. Then Wolverine Logan was stunned. All that was left in front of him was the devastated island. The X-Men and the members of the Hellfire Club had all disappeared. Even the wreckage of the nuclear submarine in the center of the island was gone. Wolverine Logan once suspected that he had swam to another island. However, Wolverine Logan's nose moved, and he smelled blood. Following the smell of blood, he found the dead Bloody-Eye Kate and Mutant Polly. Looking at the injuries of the two mutants, Wolverine Logan frowned. Bloody-Eye Kate died in a very strange way. Without any injuries on her body, her eyes were wide open, as if she had seen something horrible. And Mutant Polly's death was even more strange. His mind was full of ideas, but the fatal injury was the metal thorn inserted in the heart. For some reason, from the way Mutant Polly died, Wolverine Logan felt a sense of suffocation of death. By the way, Victor. Wolverine Logan withdrew his gaze from Mutant Polly, and then he turned his head and looked around. Thanks to his beast instinct, Wolverine Logan smelled the scent of Sabretooth Victor. However, what made Wolverine Logan a little strange was that Sabretooth Victor's scent seemed to have changed a little, but Wolverine Logan didn't know what the change was. Sabretooth Victor left the island. It seems that this mutant war is over. I just don't know whether the X-Men won or the Hellfire Club won. Wolverine Logan knew through his sense of smell that Sabretooth Victor had left the island. He looked around, and then followed Sabretooth Victor's scent and quickly left the island. So far, this mutant war has come to an end. Half an hour later, the X-Men's supersonic fighter appeared in New York, then passed through several blocks and landed on the lawn of Xavier's manor. Then the door of the supersonic fighter opened. Brian flew out of the cabin first. Magneto followed closely. Behind Magneto, Professor X floated into the air, and Beast Hank carrying the Siren's coffin. Finally, Cyclops Scott and Shockwave Alex. Everyone quickly walked to Xavier's manor. Raven, who had restored her mystique form, had been waiting for a long time. "Brian, how is Charles?" After Brian and others entered the living room, Raven immediately came to Brian's side and asked with a worried look on her face. "Don't worry, Raven. Professor X is fine. He just hasn't woken up yet because of the previous brain injury." Brian patted Raven gently and comforted her. Raven never doubted Brian's words. Brian said Professor X was fine, which meant he was really fine. Raven breathed a sigh of relief. "Professor X is unconscious, and the X-Men will be under my command for the time being." Seeing that the X-Men are in a low mood, Brian took over the command of the X-Men without hesitation. Yes, Homelander. The X-Men, including Magneto, had no objection to Brian taking over the leadership of the X-Men. They were even happy to see it happen. Obviously, everyone was convinced of Brian's strength. The Black Emperor Shao has arrived in New York, and the nuclear explosion can happen at any time. Now immediately transfer the materials in Xavier's manor to the underground nuclear shelter. Brian gave the order. Under the order, all X-Men members took action. Magneto and others began to collect supplies at a rapid speed. Then, like ants moving house, they moved all the supplies to the nuclear shelter. And Brian brought Ray to the X-enhancement room. Brian opened his hands, and psychokinesis burst out. The metal plates of the X-enhancement room were all opened. The parts of the brainwave enhancer inside were exposed. I didn't expect the inside of the brainwave enhancer to be so complicated. Raven looked at the various mechanical parts on the wall of the X-enhancement room and couldn't help but exclaimed. However, the complex mechanical structure for Raven. In Brian's eyes, it was extremely simple. The ability to see through the laws of operation of all things. Let him deconstruct any mechanical deconstruction at will. As early as when Beast Hank built the brainwave enhancer, Brian had already mastered the construction of the brainwave enhancer perfectly through his ability. At this moment, these complex mechanical structures were rapidly decomposed and reconstructed in Brian's eyes. He could see through the function and position of each part in the mechanical structure. Click, click, click. Brian snapped his fingers lightly. The psychokinesis storm instantly swept through the X-enhancement room. "Zero, please give me flowers." Zero, the original complete mechanical structure, like a butcher cutting a cow, was quickly decomposed into parts, and then these parts were controlled by Brian. Flew out of the X-enhancement room, then flew into the nuclear shelter by itself, and quickly assembled. It took only a few minutes. Brian dismantled the brainwave enhancer that X had enhanced. Then he rebuilt the X-enhancement room in the deepest part of the nuclear shelter. And, during the reconstruction process, Brian also optimized the performance of the brainwave enhancer. And in the brainwave enhancer, He added some functions that only Brian knew. And just after Brian completed the reconstruction of the X enhancement room, Magneto and others also moved all the materials in Xavier's manor into the nuclear shelter. Now, the X-Men have completely moved their base into the nuclear shelter. Brian, do you know when Black Emperor Shao is going to explode? Magneto settled Professor X, then walked to Brian and sat down, saying with some worry, Magneto, are you worried about the people of New York? Brian looked at Magneto with a smile. This is not Magneto's character. I'm worried about what the people of New York will do. What I'm worried about now is that Black Emperor Shao. I'm afraid we can't kill him. Magneto smiled bitterly. Whether the people of New York live or die is none of Magneto's business. What he really worries about is that he can't kill Black Emperor Shao. After all, the current Black Emperor Shao is invincible. He defeated the X-Men in just one encounter. If it weren't for Beast Hank's healing potion, he would be dead now. Black Emperor Shao is too strong. Magneto has lost the confidence to kill Black Emperor Shao. Black Emperor Shao is destined to die? We just need to wait for the opportunity now. Brian's eyes are extremely confident. What did he join the X-Men with so much difficulty for? In addition to letting Professor X search for mutant for him, the most important purpose is that Brian wants to kill Black Emperor Shao. Now, everything is ready. Only the East Wind is missing. Magneto, you have to know that we have an old saying in the East. If you want to destroy it, you must first let it expand. Brian's eyes are extremely deep. Now is the time when Black Emperor Shao is the strongest. It is also the time when Black Emperor Shao is the most inflated and arrogant. Arrogant people lead themselves to destruction, even if he is the strongest mutant in the world. No exception. If you want to destroy it, you must first make it swell. Magneto pondered Brian's words, but he could not understand the meaning. Magneto, do you really want to defeat Black Emperor Shao? Brian suddenly looked at Magneto seriously and asked with a smile on his face. Definitely. I want to kill Black Emperor Shao all the time. Magneto nodded and said in a deep voice, Very good. Come on, Magneto. Brian's abrupt words made Magneto stunned for a moment. Magneto looked at Brian with a puzzled face. Brian ignored Magneto's doubts. He took Magneto to the top laboratory in Xavier Manor. Here, there is an instrument that is ahead of its time. It is the nuclear magnetic resonance device developed by Beast Hank. Now lie down. Brian brought Magneto to the MRI machine and gestured to Magneto. What is this for? Magneto looked at the MRI machine in front of him in confusion, not knowing what Brian asked him to do here. Magneto, do you remember my ability? Brian asked solemnly. Definitely. Hank said your ability is copying. Magneto nodded and said, Yes, my ability is copying. Recently, I found that the magnetic field generated by the MRI makes it easier for me to copy other people's abilities. Brian said nonsense casually. However, Brian was not lying. Through the MRI machine, Brian can indeed easily obtain other people's abilities. It's just that the method is a little different. I see. Magneto nodded in sudden realization. Then he lay in the MRI machine without hesitation. Very good, Magneto's magnetic field control is in hand. Looking at Magneto in front of the MRI machine, Brian smiled very brightly. Then he quickly started the MRI machine. Brian sat at the control panel of the MRI machine, watching the increasingly clear brain scans, and he comfortably poured himself a cup of coffee with psychokinesis. Chapter 86. New York, Xavier Manor. In the top medical room built by Beast Hank, the MRI machine made a series of buzzing sounds. In the machine, Magneto waited quietly. A minute later, the MRI machine stopped. At the same time, in front of the control panel of the MRI machine, Brian was holding a cup of coffee and observing Magneto's brain scan structure diagram with a comfortable face. The ability to see through the laws of operation of everything. It took Brian only a few seconds to find the ability center of Magneto's brain. In an instant, Kyan had obtained Magneto's ability. Magnetic field control. This is the movie universe. Comic fans don't criticize. And directly one-click full level. Magneto can only control metal now. And Brian can already perceive the Earth's magnetic field and control it at will. At this moment, in Brian's eyes, there are many magnetic fields floating around him, and these magnetic fields are complicated. Some are magnetic fields released by the human body. Some are magnetic fields released by surrounding objects. Some are metal magnetic fields. Some are magnetic fields formed by various electromagnetic signals. These magnetic fields have different file sizes, and one of the larger ones is Magneto in the MRI machine. The smallest magnetic field is an ant, and its magnetic field is very weak. After gaining control of Magneto's magnetic field, Brian gained an extremely magical perspective. Magnetic field sensing perspective. He can perceive all objects around him through magnetic field sensing. He can resonate with the magnetic field of the surrounding environment by releasing his own magnetic field, so that Brian can easily perceive everything around him. This kind of perception is countless times clearer than the imaging of MRI. Even the visual clarity of magnetic field sensing exceeds Brian's naked eye observation. He can not only observe the objects around him, he can even perceive the internal structure of the object through the magnetic field. Similarly, Brian can perceive the human body by sensing the magnetic field generated by the surrounding human body. The magnetic field on Brian's body instantly enveloped Magneto lying on the MRI machine. Under Brian's magnetic field perception, he clearly saw the brain tissue blocked by Magneto's skull. Even the internal organs, bones, flesh, blood, etc. of the body. At this moment, Brian was like a full-range scanning perspective device. All the structures inside Magneto's body were in Brian's sight. In addition to magnetic field perception, Brian can do everything that Magneto does. He can not only control metal. As long as there is an object with a magnetic field, he can control it. He can control the magnetic field of life with ease. Moreover, he can control electric current through magnetic field, and even directly generate electric current through magnetic field, and accelerate a coin directly into a super electromagnetic gun through magnetic field. Definitely, Brian can also apply magnetic field to the human body, so as to generate high-voltage electric current between cells. Constantly stimulate cells through electric current to enhance their own physical strength. Under the full level of one click, Brian's control of magnetic field is as easy as using his arms. If he bursts out magnetic field with all his strength, he can even temporarily affect the huge amounts of magnetic field of the Earth, thereby causing terrible destructive power. It is easy to destroy a city. After gaining control of Magneto's magnetic field, Brian was in a good mood. From this moment on, Brian would completely say goodbye to the way of gaining abilities by cutting brains. Now he only needs to use magnetic field perception to obtain any desired variant ability. Brian came to the MRI machine. Under Magneto's gaze, strands of electric current fell from the MRI machine into Brian's hands. Under Magneto's astonished gaze, the blue arc danced in Brian's hands like a fairy. "Brian, how did you do this?" Magneto looked at Brian, who was controlling the electric current at will, and was stunned for a moment. He was very sure that Brian had copied his ability, because the coin in Magneto's palm was gradually floating towards Brian. Obviously, Brian had obtained his own magnetic field control ability. However, what made Magneto unbelievable was Brian, who had obtained his own ability, could actually control the electric current. Magneto was a little numb. Could it be that his magnetic field control was fake? Seeing Magneto was confused by his own operation, Brian flicked his hand, and the blue electric current turned into a thick blue beam of light under the acceleration of the magnetic field, and then directly hit the door of the nuclear power room. Boom! The alloy door was directly penetrated by the high-voltage electric current. Brian took back the ability, patted Magneto on the shoulder, and said earnestly, "Magneto, you should learn more when you have time. Magnetic field control is not just about controlling metals." After Brian finished speaking, he left the MRI room. Only Magneto was left, and he began to doubt life. He looked at his hands, then looked at the MRI machine, and then he raised his hand to release his ability. Bang! However, as Magneto released the ability, the MRI machine was instantly squeezed into a ball of scrap copper and iron. The electric current formed by the short circuit of the instrument spread wantonly. Looking at the electric current on this iron lump, Magneto opened his right hand, trying to learn from Brian and attract the electric current. However, no matter how Magneto released his ability, he never caused the electric current to fluctuate even a little bit. This made Magneto doubt his life again. K. How did Brian do it? Magneto was not convinced. He tried his best to release his ability, but he did not learn to control the electric current until he was exhausted. Magneto began to lose his defense. Should I really study hard? Magneto frowned. From childhood to adulthood, he was either killing people or practicing his ability, and never really went to school. In short, Magneto was illiterate. Originally, he did not think that the knowledge would be helpful to him. But after seeing Brian controlling the electric current at will, Magneto felt that he might really need to study hard and enrich himself. After making up his mind, Magneto came to the library of Xavier Manor and picked up a few books on electromagnetism. After flipping through a few pages and finding that he could not understand them at all, Magneto had no choice but to settle for the next best thing and start learning physics from elementary school. Just when Magneto was ready to work hard and study hard, Brian had already arrived above Xavier's manor. At this moment, he was suspended 50 meters above Xavier's manor and then directly released his magnetic field perception. Boom! An invisible magnetic field instantly spread from Brian's body to all directions. It instantly enveloped the entire New York. Everything in New York was in Brian's sight. He seemed to be observing the entire New York from a god's perspective. At this moment, countless people in New York were still evacuating in panic. On the streets, the American military was maintaining order. At the same time, they were also setting up fortifications in various places in New York. Although Professor X had previously released a mental broadcast that Black Emperor Shao was about to transform into a humanoid nuclear bomb and bomb New York. However, some high-ranking military officials in America still didn't care. They didn't think anyone could release a nuclear explosion, even if this person was a powerful mutant. These high-ranking officials in America stubbornly believed that Professor X's telepathic broadcast was a bit exaggerated. They only needed to build fortifications that could defend against missiles. They could resist the attack of Black Emperor Shao, especially after the President of America disappeared. Some politicians and high-ranking officials who had originally succumbed to the President of America began to stir. They tried to defeat Black Emperor Shao through human power, and thus become a superhero comparable to X-Men. Even these people were ambitious to overthrow Black Emperor Shao, and then study Black Emperor Zhao's ability through technological means. That is why, in just 1 hour, Trask Industries became the target of these politicians and high-ranking officials. After all, in this era, only Trask Industries had studied mutants. Moreover, in order to completely overthrow Black Emperor Shao, these high-ranking officials not only secretly prevented the evacuation of the American people, but also constantly sent reinforcements to New York. In a short period of time, the New York Army has already had hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Moreover, the New York Army transported all kinds of modern armed forces that were not in the concept. That is why, until now, the population of New York City is still as huge as 1.5 million. TSK. These American military are really giving. Brian used magnetic field sensing to observe the entire New York City. Magnetic field sensing allows him to sense everyone even if they are hidden in heavy fortifications. Super hearing allows him to hear everyone's voice clearly. At this moment, Brian seemed to be an observer, observing every move of everyone in New York City. At this moment, in the city of Manhattan, New York, huge amounts of fortifications are nearing completion. A young colonel officer is worried at this moment. He sat in the temporary command post. His eyes looked dim. "Colonel Stryker, what's wrong with you?" In the command post, a dwarf in a scientific white coat was walking out of the general's office and happened to see the young officer, who was looking very sad. "Dr. Bolivar, I think we are too optimistic." Looking at the short doctor in front of him, the young colonel frowned and said. Brian knew the two people in the conversation. One was William Stryker, the father of Wolverine. The other was Dr. Bolivar Trask, the father of Sentry. One of them was a colonel in the military. The other was the head of Trask Industries. Both were recruited to New York to fight against the evil Black Emperor with the American military. Colonel William Stryker, who had met Brian once and witnessed Brian's unparalleled power. Now he is panicking. Unlike those idiotic and ambitious military leaders, William Stryker has truly seen the power of mutant. Brian brought him extreme despair. That is why William Stryker is always careful and cautious when facing mutant. He doesn't think that the powerful X-Men are exaggerating. Black Emperor Shao can really explode. William Stryker doesn't want to face a nuclear explosion, so he is ready to escape. but as a military personnel. Unless he has a special transfer order, even if he dies, he can only die in New York. Helpless William Stryker can only focus on Bolivar Trask. After all, Bolivar is the actual controller of Trask Industries. The military high-level officials have given him very high authority. You are right, Mr. Stryker. Black Emperor Zhao's ability is really too powerful. Before my sentry was built, no one could match Black Emperor Zhao. Bolivar nodded seriously. It was not just Stryker who was panicking. In fact, Bolivar was even more panicking. He had studied mutants. He knew that some mutants were simply the bugs of this world. He once extracted the blood of a Nig mutant through social experiments. Through the blood study of the Darwin, Nigeria, Bolivar discovered that Darwin's genes had the ability to adapt to evolution infinitely. This discovery laid the foundation for his sentry research. Similarly, it also made him realize the potential and power of mutants. A powerful mutant is really destructive. So, when he heard that Black Emperor Zhao was going to bomb New York, Bolivar was ready to leave New York. He was just an ordinary human being, but he didn't have the infinitely adaptable body like Darwin. Bolivar and William Stryker hit it off. Under Brian's watch, the two requisitioned a supersonic aircraft with Bolivar's authority. Then the supersonic plane took off quickly and left New York quickly. In fact, it was not just William Stryker and Bolivar. There were also many soldiers who tried every means to escape from New York. As for the people of New York, under the instigation of the top leaders of America, they were still carefree and maintained a normal lifestyle. Brian no longer paid attention to these people who were destined to die. He quickly locked the location of Black Emperor Zhao at the moment. Now Black Emperor Zhao was in a Michelin restaurant, enjoying a rare delicacy. He was sitting at the dining table at the moment, with a napkin hanging around his neck, a knife and fork in his hand, and was cutting a steak very gentlemanly. I haven't tasted the taste of America for a long time. Black Emperor Zhao put the steak into his mouth, his face full of enjoyment. During this period, because of the existence of X-Men, Black Emperor Zhao was forced to go to the Soviet Union. He hadn't tasted American food for a long time. Especially spending a lot of time absorbing nuclear energy made him a little hungry, although he was already the strongest mutant in the world. But Black Emperor Zhao still couldn't get rid of the physiological needs of ordinary people. So after the Red Devil brought him to New York, he found an empty Michelin restaurant. Then he asked the Red Devil to bring Michelin chefs from other cities to make a sumptuous dinner for Black Emperor Zhao. Red Devil, how many people have gathered in the south of America? After finishing the steak, Black Emperor Zhao drank a sip of red wine elegantly, then took off the napkin around his neck, wiped his mouth, and asked the Red Devil beside him. Zhao, the American military has gathered 500,000 soldiers. The Red Devil sat on the other side of the table, eating heartily while answering Black Emperor Zhao's question. Come on, come to New York. This way I can solve the American military once and for all. Black Emperor Zhao tapped the table lightly with his right hand, his face full of smiles. The reason why he didn't immediately nuclear New York, it was to let the American military send more people to New York to die. In this way, he could solve the American military once and for all. Moreover, Black Emperor Zhao is very arrogant now. He thinks he is destined to win. He is about to create a new world. So, he needs to have some sense of ritual for his self-destruction. That is why New York is still safe and sound until now. Red Devil, notify the American military and ask them to speed up their actions. In 2 hours, I will announce to the world that an era belonging to mutant will completely come. In 2 hours, I will nuclear bomb New York. After a moment of silence, Black Emperor Zhao ordered the Red Devil again. The Red Devil paused while eating, then nodded and disappeared in the restaurant. When he appeared again, the Red Devil had appeared in Xavier Manor. Chapter 87. Xavier Manor. A red mist suddenly appeared in the manor. Then the Red Devil walked out of the red mist. He came here to tell Brian about Black Emperor Zhao. However, before the Red Devil could speak, Brian spoke first and told Black Emperor Zhao's decision. Red Devil, I already know. Black Emperor Zhao will bomb New York in 2 hours. Brian's words stunned the Red Devil. He looked at Brian in surprise. He never thought that Brian already knew the news. What does this mean? It means that Black Emperor Zhao's every move is under the control of Buchanan. Brian ignored the Red Devil's surprise. He was concentrating on releasing magnetic field perception at this moment. However, when Brian covered Black Emperor Shao with his own magnetic field perception. His magnetic field was instantly absorbed by Black Emperor Zhao's body, and Black Emperor Shao also stopped eating. This is the energy of the magnetic field. Is it Eric? He's not dead yet. Black Emperor Shao frowned slightly. Just now, he suddenly realized that his body was spontaneously absorbing energy. His ability let him know that he absorbed the energy of the magnetic field. And the only one who possessed the controlling magnetic field ability was his good student, Magneto Eric Lyncher. Eric, it's your fate. After realizing that the increase in energy came from Magneto's magnetic field control, Black Emperor Shao just snorted coldly, and then continued to enjoy his dinner. And on Xavier Manor, Brian sighed slightly. His face was full of pity. Just now, he was going to see if he could directly obtain Black Emperor Zhao's ability through magnetic field perception. But, obviously, Brian failed. Black Emperor Zhao's ability was too buggy. He could absorb all forms of energy. And the magnetic field is also a kind of energy. He could only sense the existence of Black Emperor Shao through magnetic field induction. But he couldn't use magnetic field perception to scan the inside of Black Emperor Zhao's body. That's why Kyan couldn't perceive Black Emperor Zhao's brain structure. He couldn't directly obtain Black Emperor Zhao's ability through magnetic field perception. Well, we still have to defeat Black Emperor Shao to obtain his ability. Brian shrugged helplessly. If you want to obtain Black Emperor Zhao's ability, you still have to fight with Black Emperor Shao in the final battle point 30, however. Although you can't obtain Black Emperor Zhao's ability, it's still possible to get the Red Devil's ability in advance. Brian retracted his magnetic field perception. Then he fell from midair. He came in front of the Red Devil, and then a magnetic field perception enveloped the Red Devil. The Red Devil's body was under Brian's magnetic field perception. It was like perspective. His skin disappeared instantly, and flesh, bones, internal organs, etc. appeared in front of Brian. The scan result was even clearer than Superman's perspective ability. In an instant, Brian saw the Red Devil's brain. The next second, a red mist appeared on Brian's body. Brian obtained the Red Devil's teleportation ability. One click full level. Brian obtained a teleportation ability that is far more powerful than the Red Devil. The correct name of the Red Devil's ability should be walking in a different space. He can go to any corner of the real world by briefly entering the different space. His demonic body can temporarily resist the pressure of the different space. However, he cannot stay in the different space for a long time. For the Red Devil, the different space is more like a transit station that can transport him to all parts of the world. And Brian, after obtaining the Red Devil's ability, he can stay in the alien space for a long time without worrying about the erosion of the alien space. Bang! Under the confused gaze of the Red Devil, Brian's body disappeared in the red fog. At this moment, Brian has appeared in a strange alien space full of red fog. The entire alien space looks not much different from reality, but the sky and the earth are both red, and it is very desolate. In the entire alien space, there is nothing except the thick red fog. These red fogs have very magical effects. They will open the channel to the real world according to Brian's thoughts. Even if Brian has never been to that place, the red fog will accurately send Brian to where he wants. However, in addition to being able to open the real channel, the red fog also has a very strong erosion effect. The red fog can erode any creature that enters this space, causing their body structure to change and gradually become like the Red Devil. And once they are completely transformed into creatures of another space, they can no longer leave this space. However, Brian is not subject to this restriction. The level 5 teleportation ability can make Brian immune to the erosion of these red gardens. Bang! Brian's mind moved, and he instantly returned to Xavier Manor. Unlike the Red Devil, who needs to gradually appear after the red fog appears, Brian's teleportation is the same as the Red Dew and himself. There is no delay in his teleportation. What he thinks in his mind is achieved instantly. Gift Crab. Looking at Brian emerging from the red fog, the Red Devil opened his mouth in shock. He couldn't believe his eyes at all. Brian actually has the same teleportation ability as himself. He can even see that Brian's teleportation ability is stronger than his own teleportation. Because Brian's teleportation is too fast, there is even no trace. When the red fog appears, it means that Brian's teleportation has ended. Brian, why can you also use teleportation? Red Devil looked at Brian in disbelief and asked subconsciously. Originally, Red Devil thought he would not get an answer. But unexpectedly, Brian actually answered. And the answer was so understated. Because my real ability is copying. I can copy any mutant's ability. When I learned that Brian's ability was not adaptive evolution, but copying, the Red Devil was stunned. He was shocked. He can copy other mutants' abilities at will. This is simply a magical skill. The Red Devil opened his mouth and couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. Brian ignored him. His body was submerged in the red mist again. New York, Brooklyn, number 233. A ball of red mist appeared in the living room. Brian teleported to his home. He returned to his home. I came to pick up White Queen Emma and Silver Fox Kayla. After Emma left the Hellfire Club, she came to New York according to Brian's request and stayed temporarily in Brian's home. At this moment, in the living room on the first floor, White Queen Emma and Silver Fox Kayla were chatting. Both of them had a trace of sadness on their faces. Obviously, the fact that Black Emperor Shao was about to bomb New York made them very uneasy. Silver Fox Kayla is just an ordinary person except for her mutant ability. White Queen Emma has telepathy and diamond ability and has strong defense. But the diamond transformation could not keep her safe in the nuclear explosion. That is why they are very nervous now. The reason why they did not leave New York immediately. It is completely out of trust in Brian. As early as after the X-Men returned to New York, Brian used sound waves to let the two people in New York return home to wait for him. It was also because of Brian's message. White Queen Emma and Silver Fox Kayla have been waiting patiently. Just when the two were chatting, Brian appeared between them. Silver Fox Kayla was immediately startled by Brian. White Queen Emma was very calm. It was just that her body turned into diamond in an instant, and she took a fighting stance. Emma, sweetheart, relax. Emma didn't relax until she heard Brian's voice. She looked at Brian, who appeared in front of her, and a smile appeared on her face. And Silver Fox Kayla directly connected to Brian's Huichin. Emma, Kayla, let's go back to Xavier Manor. Brian embraced people on both sides, and then prepared to teleport back to Xavier Manor. However, just when the red mist was spreading over Brian, Emma stopped Brian directly. Brian, wait a moment. The relevant documents of Water Company also need to be taken away. As Emma spoke, she returned to the bedroom on the second floor and handed a thick document to Brian. Brian took the document with curiosity and then simply flipped through it. Brian's smile instantly blossomed. This is a relevant qualification document of Water Company, a subsidiary of the Water Group, and an investment certificate from a New York venture capital company that is as numerous as snowflakes. As early as after arriving in New York, Emma has been helping Brian to prepare for matters related to Water Company. Emma has excellent administrative ability. It took only a few days to complete the establishment of Water Company, and, relying on her administrative ability, Emma successfully made Water Company the darling of New York capital. In just one day, it absorbed tens of billions of dollars in assets. With these funds, Emma easily made Water Company a top company that mass-produces superheroes. Although Water Company is currently only known to New York capitalists, but there is no doubt that Water Company, which is committed to creating superheroes, has become a new star of the New York Capital Group. Especially in X-Men, is already famous all over the world. Countless capital tycoons wave their mane in their hands, wanting to join the board of directors of Water Company. And Emma firmly controlled the board of directors and harvested all these capital tycoons. It can be said that the current Water Company only needs an office building to be completely formed. Well done, Emma. Brian gave Emma a passionate kiss. It must be said that Emma's ability is really strong. Not only the mutant ability, but her administrative ability is also an ability gift. Brian felt that he had picked up a treasure. He was originally a little worried about how to manage Water Company after establishing it. After all, Brian would not spend any time to manage Water Company. Now it's good. With Emma, Brian can completely hand over the affairs of Water Company to Emma, and he himself only needs to be a hands-off shopkeeper. After Brian finished reading the documents, a cloud of red mist came out of his body. Brian casually threw the documents into the different space through the channel constructed by the red mist. I have to say that the alternate space is a very good space warehouse. Brian can control the teleportation ability at will and enter and exit the layer space freely. Similarly, it is also possible to establish a one-way channel between the real world and the alternate space. And it is very convenient. With just a thought, the file appeared in his hand again. Let's go, we should go back. Brian stretched out his hands to Emma and Silver Fox Kayla. The two immediately held Brian's hands. Bang! A red mist enveloped the three people. When the red mist dissipated, Brian had already appeared in Xavier Manor with Emma and Silver Fox Kayla. White Queen Emma? Magneto, who had just come out of the library, saw Brian and Emma and Silver Fox Kayla beside him. Magneto was no stranger to Silver Fox Kayla. But after seeing Emma, Magneto frowned. Before that, Emma was the White Queen of Hellfire Club. So, Magneto subconsciously opened his right hand, ready to release the coins in his hand. However, Magneto hadn't acted yet. His mind stopped instantly. Poor Magneto. He looked at Magneto, whose mind was still, with some sympathy, and then Brian brought Emma and Silver Fox Kayla to the nuclear shelter. It was not until Brian and the other two walked away. Magneto finally got rid of the still mind. F***K, the psychic mutant, is my nemesis. Magneto's face is very ugly now. Obviously, facing Emma's psychic power, Magneto has no way. He now understands why Black Emperor Shao always wears that ugly helmet. Although it is ugly, it is really useful. Magneto glanced at the direction Brian left, then shook his head and stopped worrying about White Queen Emma appearing in Xavier Manor. After all, the current leader of the X-Men is Brian, and White Queen Emma was brought back by Brian himself, which is not something Magneto can question. Magneto shook his head and walked straight to the meeting room of the nuclear shelter. When he just walked out of the library, he met the Red Devil. The Red Devil brought him a message. In 2 hours, Black Emperor Shao will bomb New York. Magneto wants to tell the X-Men this news. The nuclear shelter in Xavier Manor is very large, and in order to facilitate survival, the nuclear shelter is occupied by Professor X's parents built many rooms. A nuclear shelter can accommodate hundreds of people at the same time. At this moment, Brian brought Emma and Silver Fox Kayla to Raven's room. As soon as he entered Raven's room, Brian found that Raven was taking a bath. During this period of time, Raven was very busy as the president. There was no time to relax. So, after solving the Hellfire Club, Raven decisively left the White House and returned to Xavier Manor. Now she is enjoying a rare leisure time. Raven, it seems that I came at the right time. Brian looked at Raven with a smile on his face. After sending out the battle request, Brian, Emma, Ruaching and Silver Fox Kayla started a melee. 1 hour later, looking at the exhausted Silver Fox Kayla, Brian casually released a magnetic field to Silver Fox Kayla. The magnetic field directly began to stimulate Silver Fox Kayla's cells. The fine electric current shuttled rapidly between Silver Fox Kayla's cells. Silver Fox Kayla's physical fitness increased at a speed visible to the naked eye. Brian closely followed Silver Fox Kayla's situation through magnetic field perception. At this moment, 10 arcs of electricity flashed constantly in Silver Fox Kayla's eyes. The electric current between cells constantly stimulated the cells, giving her a numb feeling. Brian constantly adjusted the intensity of the magnetic field so that the electric current in Silver Fox Kayla's body could stimulate the cells to the greatest extent without causing damage to Silver Fox Kayla's cells. Under Brian's control, Silver Fox Kayla's body was changing rapidly. Her cells began to rapidly renew, and old cells were replaced by new cells. Her heart roared like an engine. That was because the electric current was madly stimulating her heart cells. At this moment, the magnetic field in Silver Fox Kayla's body pushed the electric current, generating a full 30 Q4 horsepower. This made her heart roar like an engine. The blood flow was even more surging like thunder. Chapter 88. Xavier Manor, inside the nuclear shelter. Brian is observing the changes in Silver Fox Kayla's body through magnetic field perception. At this moment, Silver Fox Kayla is under Brian's magnetic field strengthening. The body cells are rapidly iterating and updating. Brian's magnetic field is like injecting Captain America's super soldier serum into each cell of Silver Fox Kayla. Silver Fox Kayla's cells began to vibrate at high speed, and the electric current originally generated by the magnetic field strengthening was moving at high speed in the magnetic field. Under Brian's control, all the cell magnetic fields of billions of cells in the body began to connect with each other. A huge life magnetic field was formed. Visible to the naked eye, Silver Fox Kayla's body surface is covered with a layer of golden life magnetic field. On the life magnetic field, strands of golden arcs are jumping rapidly. These golden arcs push the cell magnetic field, and Silver Fox Kayla's life magnetic field begins to strengthen rapidly. Under the influence of the life magnetic field, Silver Fox Kayla's cells began to undergo cell reorganization. Her heart was the first to change. The heart, which had been beating steadily, was now like a car engine running at high speed. The heart engine roared. The magnetic field in her body pushed the electric current, generating a powerful force of 300 horsepower. This made the blood flow rate of her heart reach a terrifying speed in an instant. A large amount of oxygen began to be inhaled into the body by Silver Fox Kayla. This oxygen was transported to all parts of the body by the blood, because the cell reorganization of Silver Fox Kayla provided the energy for the reorganization. Buzz. The golden life magnetic field on Silver Fox Kayla's body expanded slightly, and then quickly contracted. She had completed the first cell reorganization. Her appearance did not change, but every cell contained powerful power and abundant energy, especially her heart, which continued to roar constantly. Silver Fox Kayla felt the power in her body surge, and she couldn't help but punch out. The electric current in her cells gathered rapidly, and at this moment, Silver Fox Kayla was like a human engine. Her fist was surrounded by purple electric current, which directly smashed the air into a gas explosion. This punch has 300 horsepower. It is comparable to a car traveling at 120 miles per hour. If an ordinary person receives this punch, he will probably have his whole body shattered instantly. Whoosh! Silver Fox Kayla exerted a little force with her feet, and the floor beneath her feet instantly shattered. Then, purple electric current lingered on her body, and she rushed out at a speed of 80 miles per hour. Bang! Silver Fox Kayla, who had not yet fully controlled the power in her body, instantly crashed into the wall beside her. The wall was immediately dented, and Silver Fox Kayla just shook her head slightly and returned to Brian's side as if nothing had happened. This impact force was nothing to her who had been strengthened by the magnetic field. After the magnetic field cell reorganization, not only did her strength and speed increase, but her cell's defense and recovery power also increased simultaneously. At the same time, her nerve reaction speed was also strengthened. It was just the 300 horsepower magnetic field strengthening generated by the cell electric current. It is enough to make Silver Fox Kayla comparable to Captain America. Even if she bursts out with all her strength, Silver Fox Kayla's speed can even surpass Captain America by a large margin. Now Silver Fox Kayla is already a veritable super soldier. After using magnetic field perception to check the internal situation of Silver Fox Kayla's body, Brian stopped the magnetic field strengthening. Silver Fox Kayla's current cell strength can only withstand 300 horsepower of magnetic field strengthening. If it exceeds this limit, Silver Fox Kayla's cells will collapse. Definitely, this does not mean that Silver Fox Kayla cannot perform magnetic field strengthening. As long as the cells in Silver Fox Kayla's body adapt to the power of electric current, they can perform magnetic field strengthening again. Although this adaptation process may be slow. Is this the throwing what? As Brian withdrew his magnetic field, the golden arc on Silver Fox Kayla's body slowly retracted into her body. She returned to her original appearance again. It seemed that there was no change, but she could feel the power that was filled to the point of explosion in her body. At this moment, Silver Fox Kayla has completely gotten rid of her weak body. In addition to the persuasion ability, her physical fitness has become that of a super soldier. Brian, you are simply my savior. Silver Fox Kayla gave Brian a passionate kiss with excitement on her face. Brian accepted it calmly. Brian, what's going on? Raven and Emma looked at Brian in surprise, with a hint of confusion in their eyes. Kayla was strengthened by my magnetic field. Brian briefly explained the ability of Magneto he had obtained, as well as the magnetic field strengthening. When she heard that Brian had obtained Magneto's ability, Raven was very calm. After all, she already knew that Brian's real ability was copy, and Emma seemed a little surprised, especially after learning that Brian's ability was copying. She was even more shocked. Brian, you are so strong, Emma said with shock on her face. Emma, I have always been strong, in every sense. Brian patted Emma's PG with a smile on his face and chuckled. Brian, can I accept your magnetic field strengthening? Raven looked at Brian with excitement. After seeing the effect of magnetic field strengthening, Raven couldn't wait to do it. Although she is already a level 4 mutant. But Raven's ability tends to be auxiliary. And Mystique's status, although it greatly enhances her flexibility, does not increase her experience much. So much so that her combat effectiveness is not even as good as that of a Special Forces soldier. That's why Raven was so excited after seeing the effect of Silver Fox Kayla's magnetic field strengthening. Definitely, Raven. Anyone can be strengthened by my magnetic field strengthening. Brian snapped his fingers lightly. He used magnetic field strengthening on Mystique Raven in the same way. A few minutes later, Mystique Raven's heart began to emit the engine roar of a top sports car. Her life magnetic field was greatly strengthened, and strands of golden arcs quickly jumped on her body surface. Compared with Silver Fox Kayla, Mystique Raven's changes were more powerful. At this moment, Raven has transformed into Mystique form. Her cells have strong flexibility. This allows her to withstand a magnetic field strength much stronger than Silver Fox Kayla. That is why the electric current driving force generated in her body has reached an astonishing 5,000 horsepower. This is already the maximum engine power that a top sports car can achieve. The roar generated by Raven's heart was even transmitted outside the room. Alarmed the X-Men outside. What happened? What's this sound? Beast Hank was the most sensitive, and the violent roar of his heart almost made him deaf. Boom. Just when the X-Men were confused, Mystique Raven has completed the magnetic field cell reorganization. All the golden electric current in her body has retracted into her body. Raven was pleasantly surprised to feel the explosive power in her body. She felt that she could blow up a tank with one punch. Bang! A ball of red mist enveloped Raven, Silver Fox Kayla, and White Queen Emma in the room. Then Brian brought Raven and the other two to the center of a small Pacific island. Raven, release your power as much as you can. Brian looked at Raven, who was eager to try, and said with a smile on his face. Boom. As Brian's voice fell, Raven immediately exerted force with her feet and jumped more than 1,000 meters in an instant. Then her whole body rotated rapidly for 7.5 times. As Raven rotated, a dazzling golden electric current appeared on her body again. Raven clenched her right fist, and the electric current metal on her body gathered on her fist. An invisible magnetic field covered her fist. Under the magnetic field, the purple-gold electric current gradually began to shine. Boom. Raven punched out. The magnetic field instantly squeezed the surrounding air, forming a heavy air bomb. Boom. A 2-meter-high rock that was dozens of meters away from Raven exploded. Boom. Raven's body landed on the ground like a cannonball, and her right fist hit the ground directly. With a burst of huge amounts of explosions, a 2-meter file-sized pit was hit on the ground. Now Raven seems to have been reborn. After the electric current pushed to 5,000 horsepower, Raven's strength was strengthened to tens of tons. Her speed can reach 180 yards per hour, and the speed of nerve reaction, body defense strength, etc., all exceeded the limit of the human body under the strengthening of the magnetic field. It reached the effect of Captain America's super soldier several times. And the biggest change in Raven is her body flexibility. After the magnetic field strengthening, Raven's body seems to have no bones at all and can bend her body at will. After the magnetic field cell reorganization, Raven's cell recovery speed has also been greatly improved. Most importantly, after the magnetic field strengthening, Raven's mutant ability has also been strengthened. Raven, who was originally only a level 4 mutant. At this moment, she has been promoted to a level 5 mutant. Her ability allows her to transform into anyone. At the same time, after transforming into someone else, Raven can also automatically obtain the other person's short-term memory. This gives her a more powerful disguise ability. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, on the Pacific Island, Raven is exerting her power to the fullest. The rocks on the island exploded under Raven's powerful power. After venting her anger, Raven stopped. She came to Brian excitedly. After gaining powerful power, she is in a good mood now. And after giving Brian a full-scale hot kiss, Raven's character of giving the nickname Little Expert still plays a role. She began to look for a suitable name for the electric current driving force generated by Brian's magnetic field strengthening. Magnetic field strengthening 5,000 horsepower. How about this name? Hearing the name given by Raven, Brian blocked her mouth helplessly. The power system generated by magnetic field strengthening is called magnetic field rotation. Brian plagiarized Hi-Ha's magnetic field rotation system without any sense of morality. Magnetic field rotation? This name is very good. Silver Fox Kayla nodded, very much agreeing with the name given by Brian. Magnetic field rotation 300 horsepower. Magnetic field rotation 5,000 horsepower. Well, very good. Raven also nodded in agreement. After strengthening Raven, Brian turned his head and looked at White Queen Emma. At this moment, Emma also looked at Brian with great expectation. Although Emma is already very strong, especially the diamond form, which gives her strong defense and good strength. But these powers are still not enough compared with magnetic field rotation. Besides, who doesn't want to become stronger? Brian also applied magnetic field strengthening to White Queen Emma in the same way. And this time, it took a full half an hour. When White Queen Emma's magnetic field strengthening was finished, her whole body was surrounded by a circle of substantial golden life magnetic field. This time of magnetic field strengthening, her body generated a full 10,000 horsepower of electric current. The powerful electric current pushed the cells in her body to move at high speed. At this moment, Emma seemed to have turned into a golden electric man. A powerful golden electric current flowed through her body. Her body gradually floated in the air. A pair of eyes also glowed with golden light. An extremely strong magnetic field pressure spread in all directions. The life magnetic field alone was enough to produce an extreme sense of oppression for ordinary people. Moreover, after the magnetic field rotated to 10,000 horsepower, Emma's cells evolved. Her cells gradually turned into golden cells. Powerful power continued to spread out from the golden cells. The life magnetic field was able to be substantially released. The high-voltage magnetic field on her body made the air around her tremble violently. White Queen Emma raised her hand, and a ball of magnetic field energy gathered in her palm. Boom! White Queen Emma threw out the golden magnetic field energy. A huge amount of rock instantly fell apart. After the magnetic field rotated to 10,000 horsepower, it was already able to release energy. The magnetic field rotated 10,000 horsepower, and the magnetic energy shone. Emma's right hand turned into a diamond with white light. The diamond fist was filled with dazzling golden electric current, and the white and gold colors complemented each other, making it dazzling. Boom! Emma punched. A huge amount of deep pit suddenly appeared on the ground. This punch, with a force of 10,000 horses, was enough to easily knock down a building. And Emma's speed was already able to achieve low-altitude flight. Its speed was enough to reach 360 yards. In addition to strength and speed, the biggest change is Emma's defense. At this moment, Emma has undergone magnetic field cell reorganization. Her diamond defense has reached an incredible level. She can already resist the bombardment of nuclear bombs in a short time. Zhao. Definitely, this time is only 1 minute. It can be said that Emma has now become a powerful and versatile level 5 mutant. Even if it is the entire X-Men training, Emma can easily crush it. What a surprise. I didn't expect that magnetic field strengthening can actually strengthen your variant abilities. Looking at Emma, who was like a Valkyrie in front of him, Brian was full of surprise. However, he also knew that this kind of enhancement of variant abilities was a rare opportunity. Silver Fox Kayla also underwent magnetic field cell reorganization, but her variant abilities did not change. This shows that magnetic field strengthening is not omnipotent. This kind of variant ability enhancement is accidental and random. Now, it's time to obtain the abilities of both Rue and Emma. After the magnetic field strengthening was completed, Brian looked at Raven and Emma. Without any hesitation, Brian released his magnetic field perception. An invisible magnetic field instantly enveloped the two. Then the brain structures of Mystique Raven and White Queen Emma were clearly presented in front of Brian. In an instant, Brian had obtained the abilities of Raven and Emma. Raven's Mystique ability, White Queen Emma's telepathy and diamondization. For Raven's ability, Brian actually didn't need it. Although the ability to change into anyone's appearance was very powerful, but it was not suitable for Brian. After all, Kayan had no interest in changing into other people's appearance. Besides, he was already so powerful that he didn't even bother to change into other people's appearance. Even if he got Raven's ability now, it was probably the last resort. Maybe at some point in the future, Kayan would need this ability. But Brian at this stage didn't need it. Compared to Raven's ability, Brian still needed Emma's more telepathy and diamondization. Chapter 89. Bang! A red mist appeared in Raven's room in the nuclear shelter. After the magnetic field strengthening was completed, Brian brought Raven and the other two back here. Brian, do you have the ability of telepathy? Emma looked at Brian with some curiosity just after returning to Raven's room. As a psychic mutant, Emma did not have the ability to distinguish between mutants and ordinary people like Professor X. But her telepathy could perceive psychic mutants like herself. In her perception, Brian exuded powerful mental fluctuations. Even Emma felt that Brian's mental fluctuations were stronger than her own. In fact, Emma was not wrong. After Brian strengthened the magnetic field for Silver Fox and Kayla, he also took Raven and Emma's abilities into his bag. Brian did not need Raven's ability for the time being and would not use it. What really helped Brian was Emma's ability. Telepathy and diamondization. Both were what Brian needed most at the moment. Especially Emma's telepathy ability. It made Brian make up for his mental deficiencies. After obtaining Emma's mental power, Brian was able to use it at will. He could read other people's memories and thoughts at will, just like Professor X and Emma. Control other people's thinking. Create mental illusions. Even directly erase other people's thoughts. Unlike Professor X's telepathy, Emma's telepathy focuses on mind control. Her mind control is much stronger than Professor X's. Emma can easily control the people controlled by Professor X. And after Brian obtained Emma's ability, one-click full level, his mind control is even stronger than Emma's. Not only can he easily deprive Professor X of the right to control other people's minds, he can even leave a mental imprint in the depths of anyone's mind. Brian has absolute control over those who have planted the mental imprint. After obtaining Emma's telepathy, his mental consciousness has also evolved. At this moment, Brian's mind moved, and his mind consciousness body had already left his body and appeared in reality. A psychic giant several meters tall appeared in the room. On the forehead of the psychic giant, there was a golden mind protection mark. After obtaining Emma's telepathy, his mind consciousness body also grew into a psychic giant. Moreover, unlike Emma who could only show her psychic giant body in the psychic world, Brian can project the body of the psychic giant into reality. The mind protection ability makes Brian's psychic giant body eternal. At this moment, Brian is not afraid of any psychic attack. Any psychic attack cannot cause damage to his psychic giant body. Even if Professor X uses a brainwave enhancer, he cannot erase Brian's psychic giant body. Cool. Raven, Emma, and Silver Fox Kayla saw Brian's psychic giant at the same time. The psychic giant gave Raven and Silver Fox Kayla a great sense of oppression. Just seeing Brian's psychic giant, they felt their hearts trembling. Seeing that Raven and Silver Fox Kayla were about to fall into fear at the spiritual level, Brian took back his psychic giant. The sense of mental oppression that permeated the room disappeared instantly. Now, it's time to wake up Professor X. Now, there are only 15 minutes left before Black Emperor Zhao's nuclear bombing of New York. Professor X is still unconscious. The brain injury obviously affected Professor X's mental consciousness. After obtaining Emma's telepathy, Brian prepared to go to Professor X's spiritual world to take a look. Why Professor X couldn't wake up? But before that, Brian needs to gather the X-Men. Brian put his right hand on his temple, and a huge mental power suddenly spread to the entire Xavier Manor. The X-Men in the meeting room suddenly heard Brian's mental voice in their brains. X-Men, assemble everyone. With this voice, Magneto and others were stunned. They looked at each other, a little confused. After Professor X fell into a coma, the mental network built by Professor X could no longer be used. That's why Brian's mental communication suddenly sounded in their minds, making them unable to react for a while. It's Brian. He may have copied Professor X's mental ability, or copied White Queen Emma's ability. It was Magneto who reacted first. Realizing that Brian might have copied Professor X or White Queen Emma's telepathy ability, Beast Hank Shockwave Alex, and Cyclops Scott looked at each other, and a look of realization appeared on their faces. They agreed with Magneto's explanation. After all, Brian's ability to copy was a fact recognized by all X-Men. Under the power of mind, Brian knew the thoughts of the X-Men very well. He even read their memories while the X-Men were talking. Decades of memory took Brian only 1 second. His mind consciousness entered the memories of all X-Men at the same time and saw all their memories from birth to the present. Emma's telepathy was ahead of Professor X in control and reading, but the range of telepathy was very small. Even after one click reached the maximum level, Brian's mind power was greatly enhanced, but he could only barely cover Xavier Manor. Professor X's mind power also needs to be obtained as soon as possible. Brian muttered helplessly. Apparently, he was very dissatisfied that telepathy could only cover Xavier Manor. After all the X-Men came to the center of the nuclear shelter, Brian snapped his fingers lightly. A ball of red mist enveloped Brian, Raven, Silver Fox Kayla, and White Queen Emma. Under the full level of one click, Brian's teleportation ability is many times stronger than that of the Red Devil. When the Red Devil teleports others, he needs to hold hands. But Brian doesn't need to do that at all. He only needs to expand the range of the red mist and wrap everyone in the red mist, and he can easily teleport people. Bang! In the central hall of the nuclear shelter, a ball of red mist appeared, and Brian appeared in front of the X-Men with Raven. After seeing Brian appearing from the red mist, the X-Men did not have any doubts. Instead, they were envious. F***K, when can I have the ability to copy? It's so cool. How many abilities has Brian copied now? Copying abilities is really a bug. Brian must be an Omega-level mutant now. Under telepathy, Brian clearly heard the voices of the X-Men. Cyclops and Shockwave both envied Brian's abilities, and Magneto was guessing how many abilities Brian had obtained at this moment. As for Beast Hank, he was already considering whether to define Brian as an Omega-level mutant. Brian directly blocked the voices of the 4 people and then looked at Professor X in the center of the hall. At this moment, Professor X was lying on a metal bed. A brainwave detector was worn on his head. The instrument next to him was recording Professor X's current brainwaves. The flat brainwaves indicated that Professor X was still in a deep coma. Professor X has closed his spiritual world because of brain damage. I will now use my spiritual power to wake up Professor X, Brian said to the X-Men, and then came to Professor X. He placed his index and middle fingers on Professor X's temples. However, just when Brian was about to release his psychic power, Magneto stopped Brian. Wait, Brian. Magneto glanced at Professor X, who was lying on the bed like a vegetable, with a frown. I heard Professor X say this before. In order to prevent his brain from being invaded by the same psychic mutant as him, he has been building his own mental defense since he was very young. Now, Professor X, who has become a level 5 psychic mutant, has a very strong mental defense. Although you have obtained the power of telepathy, I am afraid you cannot break through Professor X's mental defense. Magneto looked at Brian and said solemnly, as a close friend of Professor X, he knew many of Professor X's secrets. Among them, Professor X has set up a strong defense in his mind. This mental defense is to prevent psychic mutants like Brian from invading his brain. Now, Professor X has closed his mind. I am afraid that even if Brian obtains the same mental power as Professor X, he cannot break it. However, Brian only used one sentence to leave Magneto speechless. Magneto, you know nothing about my power. Magneto was silenced by Brian. Brian no longer paid attention to Magneto, and all his spiritual power flowed into Professor X's brain. Buzz, with a burst of spiritual vibration. When Brian opened his eyes again, he had come to Professor X's spiritual world. Brian looked at the spiritual world in front of him with interest. At this point in time, Professor X did not regard Xavier College as his spiritual sustenance. His spiritual world was not the appearance of Xavier Manor. Instead, it was the appearance of Oxford University where he once worked. In the whole university, people came and went, and all kinds of students and teachers had smiles on their faces, as if this was not a spiritual world at all, but a real world. Buzz. Brian's mind swept across, trying to find Professor X. However, as Brian released his spiritual power, tens of thousands of students in the whole school suddenly looked at Brian. Invader. A student looked at Brian with cold eyes, and then all the students made the same cold voice as this student. Open the spiritual barrier. Buzz. Under Brian's gaze, the entire school was shrouded in a thick layer of golden barrier. This golden mental barrier directly blocked Brian outside the campus. Is this the mental defense set up by Professor X? Brian touched the golden barrier in front of him with a look of surprise. Then Brian released a mental attack towards the barrier. A mental energy was released from Brian's hand and then bombarded the golden barrier. Buzz. After the mental energy touched the golden barrier, it was immediately bounced back. Looking at the oncoming mental energy, Brian crushed it with a palm. It has to be admitted that the mental defense set up by Professor X is really strong. Even if Professor X himself comes to crack it, it will take a long time. His mental defense can almost block the invasion of any mental mutant. However, Brian is no longer blocked. Because Brian not only has mental power, he also has the ability to adapt and evolve infinitely. Brian came to the mental barrier and punched it with all his strength. Boom. Brian's full mental power attack did not shake the mental barrier at all. On the contrary, after enduring this mental attack, the mental barrier instantly rebounded Brian's mental power. Brian did not dodge or avoid. He let the rebounding mental power hit him. Buzz. As the mental power touched Brian's body, his adaptive evolution ability was activated instantly. The body of the mental giant, which had already reached several meters in height, rapidly increased by 2 meters. Brian looked at his strengthened mental power and couldn't help but laugh. He laughed very brightly. The mental power that evolved through adaptation will not degenerate. Brian did not hesitate at all and stood in front of the mental barrier, firing at full power. At this moment, Brian clenched his fists, gathered all the mental power of the mental giant's body, and punched the mental barrier one by one. He only used mental power to attack, but never defended. At this moment, there was a rare way to quickly enhance mental power, so how could Brian not seize the opportunity? Under Brian's crazy attack, his body grew rapidly in an instant. After a few minutes, he had become a mental giant hundreds of meters tall. The entire campus, in front of Brian, was like a miniature campus model. The mental barrier below, it was even smaller. Brian raised huge amounts of his right foot and instantly stepped on the mental barrier. Crack, click. Brian's mental power was so terrifying at this moment. It was even better than the future apocalypse. Professor X's mental barrier was very strong, but it couldn't withstand Brian's mental bombardment this time. As Brian's right foot collapsed, the mental barrier collapsed. Invader, die. As the mental barrier shattered, everyone in the campus rushed towards Brian. These people were Professor X's mental projections. Although the power of a mental projection was very weak, the power formed by tens of thousands of mental projections was so strong that even White Queen Emma could not resist it. As these people rushed towards Brian, everyone instantly turned into a mental storm and swept towards Brian. Facing the mental storm, Brian just raised his right hand. Then he slapped it suddenly. Boom. The entire mental storm, along with the campus, was all destroyed by Brian's mental power. Looking at the empty mental world, Brian snapped his fingers lightly. His body shrank rapidly. Then it became Brian's original height file size. This did not mean that Brian's mental giant body disappeared. Rather, he used his mental power to compress the hundreds of meters tall mental giant body to Brian's height file size. As his mind compressed, Brian's mind became more and more solid. The mental consciousness body originally had no mass. But now, Brian's mental body has mass. His mental body is no different from the body in the real world. He looked down at his mental body. Brian smiled. In terms of the strength of the mental consciousness body alone, Professor X can't catch up with Brian. Definitely, this is only in the mental consciousness body. Apocalypse's mental consciousness body is also many times stronger than Professor X. But in terms of telepathy and mind control, Professor X can easily beat Apocalypse. After Brian destroyed Professor X's mental campus, the original mental campus instantly became the X enhancement room, and Brian, at this moment, was standing outside the X enhancement room. Looking at the closed door in front of him, Brian's mind swept over it, and the door opened in response. Brian, you are here. At this moment, the X enhancement room was dark, and as Professor X's voice sounded, the lights in the X enhancement room lit up, and Brian also saw what Professor X looked like at the moment. Chapter 90. Professor X's Spiritual World. After shattering Professor X's spiritual defense, Brian finally saw Professor X, who had locked himself in the X enhanced room. At this moment, in the enhanced room, Brian walked into it. The entire X enhanced room was dark. As a spiritual mutant, Brian could sense that this darkness was completely made up of despair and fear. "Brian, you're here." In front of the console of the X-enhanced room, a slightly decadent voice sounded. Then in this dark X-enhanced room, a light shone on Professor X. With the help of this light, Brian finally saw Professor X at the moment. Then his face became weird. Professor X in front of him was too decadent. His beard was sloppy. His eyes were dull. His eye sockets were deep. His suit, which was very neat in the past, became dirty at this moment. He looked like a beggar. Especially Professor X's behavior at this moment. He held a bottle of vodka in his right hand and was pouring it into his mouth in big gulps. His body was even crooked and slumped on the chair. He looked at Brian with blurry eyes. It was more than decadent. It was simply too decadent. Pain, despair, fear. "So that's it, Professor X. You were autistic because of the Black Emperor Shao." Brian looked at the decadent Professor X in front of him and pressed his right hand on his temple, perceiving Professor X's emotions and thoughts. Then Brian suddenly realized. The reason why Professor X was so decadent in the spiritual world was because he was autistic because of the invincible Black Emperor Shao. F***K, Brian, don't use telepathy on me. Seeing Brian reveal the reason for his decadence, Professor X instantly broke down and yelled at Brian. At the same time, Professor X also stood up from his chair, with his right hand on his temple, and a huge spiritual power instantly surged towards Brian. Facing Professor X's spiritual attack, Brian also released his spiritual power. Boom. The two spiritual powers collided in the X-enhanced room, and the originally dark X-enhanced room was instantly shaky. The metal plates in the enhanced room fell inch by inch, and as Brian strengthened his spiritual power, Professor X's spiritual power was gradually crushed. In terms of spiritual range, Professor X is the strongest. But in terms of mind reading and mind control, Emma is undoubtedly the strongest. Definitely, Brian is the strongest now. White Queen Emma's telepathy. F***K. F***K. Stop, Brian. Stop. Seeing his telepathy being easily crushed by Brian, Professor X stepped back. The metal plate of the X enhancement room fell again. At the same time, on the remaining metal plate, the scene that Professor X was most reluctant to face at the moment was reflected. There was only one figure in the picture. That was Black Emperor Shao, who walked out of the nuclear power room. At this moment, Black Emperor Shao exuded an invincible posture. "Charles, do you still want to challenge again? Do you still want to continue to face failure?" Black Emperor Shao looked at Professor X's direction with a look of arrogance and disdain on his face. No. Seeing that Brian had begun to read his thoughts, Professor X could not help but grab his hair with both hands in annoyance, and then slumped down in the chair. Professor X no longer resisted. He allowed Brian to use the power of telepathy to read his thoughts at the moment. As Professor X gave up resistance, the original X enhancement room disappeared instantly. Instead, there was a scene of Black Emperor slaughtering X-Men again and again. "Black Emperor Shao is too strong. I can't think of a way to defeat Black Emperor Shao." Seeing that he could no longer hide his thoughts, Professor X simply said it out. One of the reasons why he didn't want to wake up was that Black Emperor Shao had beaten him into autism. Black Emperor Shao was too strong. X-Men were just like ants in front of Black Emperor Shao. Black Emperor Shao could easily crush X-Men to death. Before the coin pierced his brain, Professor X saw Black Emperor Shao ruthlessly slaughtering X-Men. In just a moment, X-Men's Magneto, Siren and himself were killed by Black Emperor Shao. As for Cyclops and Shockwave, they were exhausted and became lambs to be slaughtered. In this battle, X-Men were completely defeated. The invincible posture shown by Black Emperor Shao made Professor X fall into deep despair. When he was unconscious, he had challenged Black Emperor Shao more than once in the illusion of his mind. However, without exception, the ending was Professor X's miserable defeat. Failure after failure made the young Professor X lose all confidence and even began to give up on himself, especially when he heard that Beast Hank sacrificed the siren to save himself and Magneto. Professor X blamed himself even more. He blamed himself for the death of the siren. In fact, although he was in a coma, he could still perceive what was happening outside, especially when he heard that there were still millions of people in New York who had not evacuated. Professor X didn't want to wake up even more. He couldn't find a way to defeat Black Emperor Shao. This also meant that he couldn't stop Black Emperor Shao from bombing New York. It was an established fact that New York was hit by a nuclear explosion. This meant that millions of innocent people would be wiped out by Black Emperor Xiao's nuclear explosion. The kind Professor X didn't want to see the scene of New York being devastated. So he shut himself in. He closed his inner world. He chose to escape. Escape from the invincible Black Emperor Shao. Escape from the fact that New York was about to be bombed. Professor X shut himself in. He was surrounded by the despair and helplessness of darkness. He began to fear Black Emperor Shao. Black Emperor Shao, in his mind, became an invincible, unbeatable source of fear. Brian, I'm scared. Black Emperor Shao is invincible. I don't want to face Black Emperor Shao again. I don't want to see all the X-Men killed by Black Emperor Shao, just like Hellfire Club. I don't want to see Black Emperor Shao nuke New York and millions of people die as a result. Professor X said painfully. So, you are living a life of drunkenness and dreaming in your own spiritual world, and completely giving up? Brian did not despise Professor X. Professor X is still very young now. He is far from being the future leader of the mutant. Fear of Black Emperor Shao is inevitable. However, although he does not despise Professor X's behavior, but this does not mean that Brian agrees with Professor X's practice of closing himself off. As the strongest mental mutant in the world, Professor X's mind is fragile. This has to be said to be an irony. Professor X was hit by Brian's words, which made Professor X's long-accumulated emotions collapse instantly. What else can I do? Should I lead the X-Men to die? F***K. You have an infinitely adaptable body. No one can kill you. You are definitely not afraid. But not everyone has an immortal body. Professor X roared at Brian. Brian scratched his ears and looked at Professor X with some disdain. Remember the name of the predicted event I told you before? This is just the first battle of mutant. In the future, there will be many such events. Among all the major events, Black Emperor Xiao's ability can only reach level 5 mutant, which is the weakest enemy. Professor X, do you plan to escape from the beginning to the end? Brian did not lie. Black Emperor Shao is indeed very strong. But there will be stronger mutants than Black Emperor Shao in the future. Whether it is the Sentry who reverses the future, or the mutant Apocalypse who is about to wake up, or Dark Phoenix, both are stronger than Black Emperor Shao. In comparison, Black Emperor Shao is strong, but his weaknesses are also obvious. If Professor X can't even face Black Emperor Shao, how can he face Apocalypse and other mutants in the future? With Brian's resounding question, Professor X's collapsed expression solidified. He looked at Brian in silence. Then the expression on his face gradually became firm. Just as Brian said, if even Black Emperor Shao, who fought the first battle of mutant, escaped, how could he grow into a true mutant leader in the future? Thank you for your enlightenment, Brian. I won't escape anymore. Professor X quickly adjusted his mood. As Professor X was no longer autistic, the surrounding lights turned on instantly, and the X enhancement room became very bright. As the lights came on, Professor X regained his figure again. His decadent look disappeared instantly, replaced by Professor X, who was full of energy. Professor X walked to Brian with a grateful face and nodded to Brian. But Brian just looked at Professor X calmly. Professor X, don't hide anymore. Brian's words made Professor X's expression, who was full of determination, instantly freeze. Brian, I don't know what you are talking about. Professor X was stunned for a second, and then he smiled again and said with a smile, Professor X, remove the mental illusion in front of you. Brian didn't even look at Professor X in front of him. He spoke to the darkness beside him. Brian, I don't understand what you are talking about. Professor X looked at Brian with a puzzled face, as if he didn't know what Brian was talking about at all. Professor X, I don't want to say it again. Brian slapped Professor X in front of him and flew him away, saying in a deep voice, Swish. As Brian's voice fell, The X enhancement room in front of him disappeared instantly. Instead, it was the lawn of Ware Manor. On the lawn, a young man was sitting in a wheelchair, quietly watching the sunrise of the spiritual world. The previous X enhancement room was just a mental illusion created by Professor X using his mental power. And now the Professor X on the lawn is the real Professor X. Brian walked to Professor X's side and gently patted the wheelchair under Professor X. Brian, as you can see, this is the real me. Professor X turned his head and said with pain in his eyes, "The coin of the Black Emperor, Shao, has Magneto's magnetic field attached to it. When it penetrated my brain, Magneto's magnetic field had some effect on my mind. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. This damaged my mind. I can no longer stand up." Professor X looked at his legs in pain. Just as Professor X said, the coin of the Black Emperor Shao has a strong magnetic field. The Black Emperor Shao did not absorb the magnetic field energy in Magneto's coin. That is why the strong magnetic field energy, after entering Professor X's brain, produced a certain induction with Professor X's mental power. This caused a mental magnetic storm. Professor X's mind was damaged. The mental magnetic storm disturbed Professor X's mental cognition. He mistakenly believed that he was paralyzed by Magneto's coin in the last battle. Professor X thought he was paralyzed, and he was really paralyzed. This is a mental trauma. Even Brian's divine blood cannot heal it. Professor X is probably aware of this, so he is reluctant to wake up. I told you a long time ago. You are destined to sit in a wheelchair, Professor X. Brian patted Professor X's shoulder without any sympathy and said very angrily, "Well, I didn't escape the prophetic curse of Irwin after all." Professor X spread his hands. In Brian's previous persuasion, Professor X had figured it out, and he no longer avoided the battle with Black Emperor Shao. Moreover, after this time of mental autism, Professor X became even bigger. He was ready to face the fact that he was paralyzed. He even thought very optimistically that if he sat in a wheelchair, his mental power would become stronger. "Let's go, Professor. Your X-Men are waiting for you." Brian patted Professor X's shoulder and said seriously, "Yes, X-Men needs a qualified leader, rather than a lawless and reckless Homelander." Professor X glanced at Brian and said teasingly, "Is it wrong to do whatever you want? Professor X, you must admit that I am the only one who understands America's spirit of freedom. Free America, staring at the National Day. I do whatever I want, isn't it reasonable?" Brian's words made Professor X speechless instantly. "Maybe we will become enemies in the future. But, no matter what, Brian, I owe you a favor." After a moment of silence, Professor X said solemnly, "After experiencing spiritual autism, Professor X's way of looking at problems has changed. He is increasingly overlapping with the future Professor X. He lost the recklessness of young people and gradually became calm and steady. That is why he sees Brian more clearly. He and Brian are destined not to be the same people. The future Brian is destined to take a completely different path. Perhaps he and Brian will stand on the opposite side and become enemies. But no matter what, Professor X does owe Brian a favor, because it was Brian who pulled Professor X out of the abyss of autism. Let him face the Black Emperor Shao bravely. Face himself. Professor X, you did me a favor." Brian nodded calmly, and then exited Professor X's spiritual world. In the hall, Brian opened his eyes instantly. What happened in the spiritual world before seemed to take a long time. But in fact, only 1 second passed. Brian took his hands away from Professor X's temples, and then ordered Beast Hank. "I have awakened Professor X. Beast Hank, go find a wheelchair." Beast Hank, Magneto, Cyclops, and Shockwave. The 4 people looked at Brian with confusion. They had no idea why Brian said that. "What are you looking at me for? Go find a wheelchair, preferably a sturdy one. This will be the best companion for Professor X for the rest of his life." Brian shrugged and said something that made the X-Men feel overwhelmed. However, although he didn't understand what Brian meant, Beast Hank still followed Brian's order, went to the utility room, and found a wheelchair. At the same time that Beast Hank pushed the wheelchair, Professor X on the bed slowly opened his eyes. "Professor X, are you awake?" Cyclops Scott was the first to discover the awakened Professor X and immediately reminded him with a face full of surprise. Everyone's eyes were all on Professor X. At this moment, Professor X on the bed supported his upper body with both hands and sat up. After seeing the wheelchair pushed by Beast Hank, Professor X cast a grateful look at Brian. Guys, who can help me move to the wheelchair? Professor X glanced at the X-Men and then asked for help. Professor X's words stunned all the X-Men. Yes, just as Brian said, I will be accompanied by a wheelchair for the rest of my life. Guys, I am paralyzed. Professor X's words made the X-Men look at each other in bewilderment. Chapter 91. Xavier Manor, Nuclear Shelter Lobby. Professor X sat in a wheelchair. The surrounding X-Men all looked at Professor X in silence. The atmosphere in the entire hall seemed very solemn. In fact, just now, Professor X had explained that his paralysis was caused by the confusion of mental cognition. That was why the atmosphere in the hall was so solemn. Because the X-Men had realized that even if Beast Hank could still develop a cure, it would not cure Professor X's paralysis. At the same time, they also understood why Brian said that Professor X would spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. I'm sorry, Charles. Magneto felt even more guilty. If he hadn't attached a huge magnetic field to the coin, perhaps the mental magnetic storm would not have been triggered. Professor X might not have been paralyzed. At this moment, Magneto looked at Professor X's intact legs, his eyes full of apology. Eric, this is not your fault. Professor X shook his head gently and said gently, because Professor X was paralyzed. The relationship between Magneto and Professor X eased a lot. Gentlemen, there are only 2 minutes left before the nuclear explosion of Black Emperor Shao. Brian couldn't bear it anymore and interrupted the two of them. After hearing Brian's words, the professor and others suddenly felt heavy in their hearts. However, no one proposed to stop Black Emperor Shao from bombing New York. Even Professor X was silent. Even though Professor X knew that there were nearly 2 million innocent people in New York City. Although he couldn't bear to see these innocent people die in the nuclear explosion of Black Emperor Shao. But at this moment he had no way. Black Emperor Shao was invincible. At least not the current X-Men could defeat him. Even if Professor X led the X-Men to forcibly stop him, it would only add a few more mutant souls to the nuclear explosion. 217 Professor X didn't want the X-Men to die in vain. So, weighing the pros and cons, Professor X could only choose to wait and see. As for the 2 million innocent people who were about to die, Professor X could only pray to God that these people could survive the nuclear explosion. This shelter can help us withstand the nuclear explosion. After Professor X said this, it meant that he had given up New York and the 2 million people in New York. No one objected to Professor X's order. In fact, it was not just Professor X who didn't want to face Black Emperor Shao. Cyclops Scott, Shockwave Alex, Beast Hank, none of them wanted to face Black Emperor Shao. As for Magneto, he didn't care about Black Emperor Zhao's nuclear explosion in New York. He only cared about one thing, that is, how to kill Black Emperor Shao. Eric, are you interested in playing chess? Professor X invited Magneto to play chess. Magneto nodded, then waved and took out a chessboard. The two of them started playing chess as if no one was around. The other X-Men saw Professor X and Magneto start playing chess. They also began to relax. Beast Hank went directly to the wine cellar of the nuclear shelter and brought a few bottles of red wine. Brian looked at the red wine that Beast Hank brought, picked up a bottle of 18th century classic red wine with psychokinesis, and then raised his hand to get 4 wine glasses. Brian poured a glass of red wine for himself, Raven, and the other 2. Let's toast to the new era of mutant. Brian raised the wine glass in his hand gentlemanly and said with a smile on his face, Cheers. ×3. White Queen Raven, Mystique Raven, Silver Fox Kayla. The 3 looked at each other, then smiled at each other and toasted to Brian. Raven and the other 2 definitely knew what Brian was celebrating. He was celebrating that Black Emperor Shao was about to start a new mutant era for him. After the nuclear explosion, the base number of mutants will increase exponentially. Black Emperor Shao thought he was fighting for his ideal. Black Emperor Shao thought he had won. Little did he know that everything Black Emperor Shao did was just to prepare for Brian. If Brian hadn't wanted to use a nuclear explosion to start the mutant era in New York, I'm afraid Black Emperor Shao would have had no chance to carry out a nuclear explosion. It can be said that the entire first battle of mutant was under Brian's control. Cheers to the upcoming nuclear explosion. Brian drank the red wine in high spirits. Then he raised his glass and gestured to the other X-Men. Cyclops and others, who had completely relaxed, also raised their glasses like Brian. Cheers. Cyclops and other X-Men drank the red wine in their hands, and then completely relaxed under the stimulation of alcohol. They drank red wine wantonly. Some even expected the nuclear explosion to come soon. Looking at the X-Men who were getting excited, Brian smiled non-committally. Then he glanced at Professor X and directly released his magnetic field perception. Professor X's brain structure was instantly presented in front of Brian. The next second, Brian obtained Professor X's telepathy ability. Boom. As Brian obtained Professor X's ability, his telepathy range instantly expanded to the entire New York City. He clearly perceived the thoughts and thinking of everyone in New York City. His mind was connected to the consciousness of everyone in New York City. At this moment, he saw 2 million people in New York. Like a tide, the voices of the mind poured into Brian's brain. However, these voices were not chaotic. Under the full level of one click, Brian can easily sort out these voices of the mind through the power of the mind. At the same time, a series of mental projections appeared around Brian. Through these mental projections, Kyan could clearly observe the actions of these people. This is my telepathy. The mental fluctuations around Brian startled Professor X, who was playing chess with Magneto. His telepathy sensed the same mental power fluctuations in Brian. This made Professor X realize it instantly. Brian copied my ability. As Professor X spoke with a little surprise, all the X-Men asked Brian, "Brian, how many abilities do you have now?" Cyclops Scott looked at Brian with envy. He had already started to calculate the abilities that Brian had copied. According to Cyclops Scott's calculations, Brian had at least 20 abilities. Brian perceived Cyclops Scott's thoughts. He just smiled faintly. In fact, not counting his Sera Template, he already had 30 variant abilities: Adaptive Evolution, Occlumency, Tornado, Four-Winged Angel Form, Psychokinesis Control, Life Expert, Divine Blood, Danger Prediction, Sound Waves, Energy Shockwave, Cyclops, Super Hearing, Persuasion Ability, Invisibility, Carbon Skin, Super Strength, Mind Protection, Perception, Energy Shield, Microwave Heating, Flight, Giant Bear Transformation, Earthquake Creation, Opening of the Calendar, Magnetic Field Control, Teleportation, Self-Healing Factor, Sabretooth Version, Telepathy, White Queen Version, Diamond Transformation, Telepathy, Professor X. Definitely, there is also the most evolved form. It can be said that at this moment, Brian has physical strength, mental power, energy radiation, flight, and psychokinesis control in one. Except for the inability to absorb energy and rewrite molecular structure. Brian is now beyond the level 5 mutant and is about to become an Omega level mutant. As long as Brian obtains the energy absorption of Black Emperor Shaw, Brian is a complete Omega level mutant. Once he becomes an Omega level mutant, Brian can almost walk sideways in the mutant universe. The reason why I say almost is because there are Omega level mutants such as Apocalypse and Phoenix Jean Grey in the mutant universe. Brian ignored Cyclops Scott's inquiry. He is now concentrating his consciousness on the center of New York City. Here, there are tens of thousands of New York military personnel and reporters from various countries who were forcibly brought here by the Red Devil. And in front of them is the Black Emperor, who is wearing a suit and standing proudly like a European aristocrat. Professor X, Black Emperor Shao, is giving his final speech. Brian's mind moved, and he directly projected the spiritual consciousness of everyone in the nuclear shelter hall into the brains of several humans in downtown New York. Everyone felt dazed. When they regained consciousness again, they had already appeared in downtown New York, occupying the bodies of some people. "Brian, you are abusing your telepathy." Professor X saw Brian directly use his spiritual power to let the X-Men occupy the bodies of those ordinary people, and immediately frowned and said, "No, Professor X, you are wasting your spiritual power." Brian patted Professor X's shoulder, and then his spiritual consciousness instantly crossed most of New York and instantly occupied a person's body. At this moment, downtown New York City, Black Emperor Shao has set up a podium. He is standing in front of the podium with high spirits, turning a blind eye to the American military below. And opposite Black Emperor Shao, A group of American soldiers are holding their rifles with fear on their faces, and their bodies can't help shaking. Some American soldiers have even begun to curse. F***K, those brain-dead idiots. Let us use rifles to deal with a nuclear bomb. Swish. As the American soldiers cursed, all the soldiers threw away their rifles at the same time and turned around and ran. Despite the constant urging and cursing of the military leaders in the headset, the engineers were unmoved. However, when the soldiers were running away frantically, some soldiers suddenly stopped with confused eyes. The next second, the eyes of these engineers changed. They seemed to have become another person. They turned their heads to observe the surrounding situation. Holy shit, Brian, what did you do to us? F***K, how did I become Nig? So, is this a mind invasion? Professor X can actually do such a thing. The soldiers uttered a series of surprised voices. These voices attracted Black Emperor Shao on the rostrum. Mind transfer. Although Black Emperor Shao did not have telepathy, he instantly realized that these people had suffered mind transfer just by hearing the conversation between these people. And the only one who could do mind transfer, except for the missing White Queen Emma, the only one who could do mind transfer was Professor X. I didn't expect Professor X to be still alive. He is really lucky. Black Emperor Zhao's face was slightly gloomy, but then he regained his composure. Now Black Emperor Shao is very arrogant. He already has invincible power. No one can defeat him now. Even if the X-Men are resurrected, it won't work. Black Emperor Shao no longer pays attention to those X-Men. Now there is only 1 minute left before he bombs New York. He is going to give a global speech. This is to welcome the coming new era of mutant. Just as Black Emperor Shao was preparing to give a speech, below him, 3 female reporters were stunned for a moment, and then their minds were replaced by the consciousness of Raven, Emma, and Silver Fox Kayla. Next to the female reporters, a white man was also confused, and then his consciousness was replaced by Brian. Beast, Cyclops, Shockwave, don't panic. You just occupied the brains of these people. Among the fleeing soldiers, a white strong man stopped and said to the stunned X-Men in a gentle voice. This voice was Professor X's voice. With Professor X's comfort, Beast Hank, Cyclops Scott, and Shockwave Alex, who became America soldiers, gradually calmed down. As for Magneto, he looked at his temporary body with great disdain at this moment. This body is a Nig soldier. After adapting to their own bodies, the X-Men came behind Brian. Raven and the other 2 had already stood on both sides of Brian. They watched the speech of Black Emperor Shao before the nuclear explosion from a close distance. Dear global human beings, I am Black Emperor Shao. I am also the creator of the new era, the savior of mutant. In 1 minute, I will first detonate New York, then Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Houston. Black Emperor Shao is like the messiah of the new era, expounding his nuclear explosion plan. Black Emperor Zhao's speech, after being broadcast by these news media, instantly spread to the world. The global human beings fell into the panic of nuclear explosion again. I will use the energy of nuclear explosion to activate the X gene in human body. My mutant brothers will be reborn from the ashes under the nuclear explosion and become new humans of the new era. Now, I declare that a new era has arrived. Black Emperor Shao suddenly opened his hands. Then a strong golden light burst out from his body. At this moment, Black Emperor Shao released all the energy in his body. He instantly turned into an energy sun. The violent energy field instantly crushed everyone into powder. The spiritual consciousness of Professor X and others instantly returned to their bodies. In the entire downtown of New York City, only Brian's spiritual consciousness was left. 4.0 After Black Emperor Shao exploded with all his energy, Brian activated the power of mind protection and came out directly from the brain of the occupied white man. At this moment, Brian's mind consciousness body is no different from his real body. He stood quietly in front of Black Emperor Shao, watching Black Emperor Zhao's nuclear explosion in New York. This is a rare scene. Originally, he planned to let the X-Men witness the scene of Black Emperor Zhao's nuclear explosion in New York. But he didn't expect that after Black Emperor Shao released all his energy field would be so strong. Ordinary people's bodies can't bear this violent energy field at all. X-Men are fine. Brian was a little regretful that Emma and the other 2 didn't watch the New York nuclear explosion with him. Brian looked up at Black Emperor Shao, who was gradually floating up. His face was full of expectations. Mind protection made his mind consciousness immortal. It also made him immune to the next nuclear explosion. Boom. The violent energy field was venting unscrupulously around. The glass of the surrounding buildings shattered. At the same time, the vehicles on the street were directly crushed by the energy field and turned into a pile of scrap metal. Boom. A huge amount of the sound of the nuclear explosion resounded throughout New York. Black Emperor Shao completely released all the energy in his body. In front of Brian, a huge amount of mushroom cloud rose up. Above the mushroom cloud, energy shockwaves swept across dozens of kilometers in an instant. Wherever the energy shockwave passed, skyscrapers exploded and collapsed in an instant. The ground collapsed. The American army closest to the center of the explosion was vaporized in an instant. The energy shockwave released by the mushroom cloud alone instantly wiped out tens of thousands of American troops. And the nuclear explosion has just begun. Chapter 92. Rumble. In the center of New York City, a new sun is rising. Brian, a spiritual consciousness body, is in the center of the nuclear explosion. Only spiritual power can hurt him. Even a nuclear explosion cannot cause any harm to Brian. Brian is now like Black Emperor Shao. He has put on a physical immunity buff. Under Brian's gaze, Black Emperor released all the nuclear energy in his body. He truly became a nuclear bomb. Huge amounts of mushroom clouds rose rapidly over New York City. The huge nuclear shockwave swept dozens of kilometers. The sound of the nuclear explosion spread throughout America. Brian's body flashed with red mist, and he had appeared in the sky 10,000 meters above New York City. From the sky, the entire mushroom cloud rose thousands of meters. Then the energy in the mushroom cloud exploded. A nuclear bomb without radiation exploded in the center of New York City. 2 million people in New York were instantly blinded by the strong light produced by the nuclear explosion. The terrifying sound waves of the nuclear explosion made them deaf. At the center of the nuclear explosion, energy compressed the air, and the scorching heat instantly melted the buildings in the center of New York. Then the nuclear explosion spread. Brian was suspended in the air at an altitude of 10,000 meters, quietly watching the nuclear explosion in New York. At this moment, the powerful energy shockwave generated by the nuclear explosion swept across New York. All the buildings in the center of New York were instantly turned into dust, and a huge amount of nuclear explosion pits appeared on the ground. The nuclear explosion pit was spreading rapidly. The energy shockwave spread from the city center to all directions at a very fast speed. Wherever it passed, the once prosperous steel city instantly turned into a ruin. Everything made by humans was as fragile as paper in the face of a nuclear explosion, and it would break at the touch. Oh my God, Black Emperor Shao really exploded New York. The high-ranking American military officials who were originally ambitious and ready to overthrow Black Emperor Shao were full of despair, and then their bodies instantly vaporized and disappeared. Along with the disappearance of the high-ranking military officials, there were also 2 million soldiers and ordinary people. The energy released by Black Emperor Shao was so huge. In just a breath, a super-large modern city was instantly reduced to ruins. At this moment, in the nuclear shelter under Xavier Manor, 30 Professor X and others were holding their ears. The huge sound waves generated by the nuclear explosion were enough to make them dizzy even if they were hiding in the nuclear shelter. At the same time, the earthquake caused by the nuclear explosion made Professor X and others start to stagger. Magneto opened his hands, and the magnetic force instantly fixed him in place. He even had time to control Professor X's wheelchair so that Professor X would not be shaken out of the wheelchair. As for Beast Hank, Ray Eyes Scott, and Shockwave Alex, Beast Hank was better. When the nuclear explosion and strong earthquake hit, he had already pierced the floor with his sharp claws, fixing his body in place. As for Cyclops Scott and Shockwave Alex, their mutant ability is very powerful, but their bodies are just ordinary people. Therefore, when the strong earthquake hit, they were directly blown away, and the country was grimacing. As for White Queen Emma and the other two, Emma directly released her diamond transformation, and the nuclear explosion and strong earthquake could not cause any damage to her body. Mystique Raven and Silver Fox Kayla turned on the magnetic field rotation mode. The golden electric current lingered all over their bodies, the life magnetic field rotated, and the whole body exuded a powerful force, like a Valkyrie, attracting the attention of the X-Men. Rumble. The nuclear explosion continued. In a few minutes, the whole New York had been reduced to ruins under the nuclear explosion. In the center of New York, a nuclear explosion crater with a diameter of several kilometers appeared. After New York was reduced to ruins, the energy field generated by the nuclear explosion, like nuclear radiation, began to cross New York City layer by layer and swept towards other parts of America. It only took 1 minute for a solid energy field to sweep across Rochester, which is adjacent to New York City. All the building glass in Rochester shattered instantly. The powerful energy field even caused some buildings to collapse. At the same time, the powerful energy field swept through the bodies of millions of people in Rochester. The powerful energy field caused everyone's body to have varying degrees of discomfort. At the same time, some humans miraculously absorbed part of the dissipated energy field. They felt as if something in their bodies was being activated. An hour later, the energy field generated by the nuclear explosion had swept across the entire America. In the center of the nuclear explosion, Black Emperor Shao slowly fell down. He had released all his energy. The entire New York had been turned into a ruined city by Black Emperor Zhao's nuclear explosion energy. Black Emperor Shao showed satisfaction on his face. He tidied up his messy clothes and jumped out of the nuclear explosion pit. He turned his head and looked around. The whole New York was devastated. The invisible energy field still filled the entire New York City. After the nuclear explosion, led by Professor X, the X-Men walked out of the nuclear shelter. Looking at the ruined Xavier Manor, Professor X's eyes flashed with 10 traces of sadness. Xavier Manor is Professor X's only home. It is also the only property left to Professor X by the Xavier family. The Xavier Manor was reduced to ruins, which also meant that Professor X was on the verge of bankruptcy. After feeling sad, Professor X quickly adjusted his mood and his face became calm again. Let's go see New York now," Professor X said to Magneto and others. Magneto nodded, then opened his right hand, and all the X-Men flew up quickly. After seeing Brian's application of magnetic field control, Magneto was suddenly awakened. He was no longer limited to controlling metals. After reading elementary school physics and understanding what magnetic fields are, Magneto was finally able to use his variant ability, a part of magnetic field control. Using magnetic fields to fly is the result of Magneto's hard work. Although Magneto's flight speed is far slower than Brian's flight, but it also allows the X-Men to observe New York after the nuclear explosion from high altitude. Magneto opened his right hand, and his body flew up quickly under the push of the Earth's magnetic field. Beside him were Professor X and the X-Men members. Under the control of Magneto's magnetic field, they slowly flew over New York. As far as the eye could see, there was a scene of ruins. Everything that originally belonged to human civilization disappeared under the nuclear explosion. Only some building ruins were left on the entire Earth. And in the ruins, Professor X and others also saw the logo of the Empire State Building in New York. New York after the nuclear explosion made Professor X and others feel extremely heavy. They flew over Brooklyn and Midtown Manhattan. This was originally one of the richest places in New York. Now, it has been completely razed to the ground. There was not even any building debris on the entire Earth. There was only heavy dust. This dust even covered the sky, and the heavy dust cloud made it almost impossible for the X-Men to breathe. Although the nuclear explosion of Black Emperor Shao would not produce nuclear radiation, but this nuclear explosion dust cloud would still appear. This was not nuclear radiation dust, but just the dust layer produced by the buildings turning into ashes. Just as the X-Men observed New York City after the nuclear explosion, below them, the air raid shelters in New York City suddenly opened. Amid the piercing air raid alarms, the New York citizens hiding in the air raid shelters slowly walked out. They looked at everything in front of them in shock. They stood on the ruins of the building, unable to come back to their senses for a long time. F***K, Huang Shao Dai. A white man lost control of his emotions and couldn't help but curse loudly, and a stone stirred up 1,000 waves. At this moment, the surviving New York citizens hated Black Huang Shao to the extreme. Anyone who could kill Black Huang Shao, they could put him on the altar. Everyone began to curse. Angry voices gradually gathered together, formed a wave of condemnation of Black Emperor Shao. Seeing that this group of New York citizens who had finally survived were about to completely lose control, the Doctor and Black Emperor Shao fought desperately. Professor X glanced at Magneto. Magneto immediately understood what Professor X meant, pressed his hands down, and all the X-Men slowly fell in front of this group of New York citizens. It's the X-Men, they are still alive. Some people saw the X-Men appearing in front of them with sharp eyes and immediately shouted excitedly. Great, the X-Men are still alive. Our superhero is still alive. X-Men, please save New York, save us. X-Men, please kill Black Emperor Shao. Walala. Under the gaze of the X-Men, all the surviving New York citizens knelt down in front of the X-Men, even prostrated on the ground, constantly praying to the X-Men. After witnessing the nuclear explosion of Black Emperor Shao in New York, they completely regarded the X-Men as the savior of mankind. They were like the most devout believers, praying for the salvation of this group of mutant messiahs. At this moment, the X-Men completely became the God Jesus of this group of people. Professor X and others looked at each other. They looked at the New York citizens kneeling in front of them, humbly begging for salvation. For a moment, their faces were full of embarrassment. Even Professor X did not speak for a long time. He knew very well that the power of the X-Men alone could not fight against Black Emperor Shao, but he did not want these New York citizens to fall into deeper despair. So, at this moment, silence is the best way. Boom. Just as Professor X and the others were silent, a sonic boom exploded above their heads. Then a figure floated in the sky above the citizens of New York. The group looked up. They immediately saw a tall figure wearing a red star cape, with red eyes and muscles like rocks. Homelander, it's Homelander. Some people looked at the figure floating in the air and shouted again. Others also recognized the floating figure in the sky. This figure was Brian. After witnessing the nuclear explosion in New York, Brian's spiritual consciousness returned to his body. After returning to his body, Brian saw the situation here through magnetic field perception. So, he used flight directly to come to the citizens of New York. At this moment, Brian's body slowly landed. The red star cape behind him fluttered, and the blue Homelander uniform made Brian look extremely handsome and powerful. At this moment, Brian seemed to be a Superman walking out of DC Comics. His feet touched the ground, and his eyes radiated red light, as if there was a flame burning in his eyes. I heard your prayers. Brian's voice was not loud, but it was clearly heard by all New York citizens. I declare again that I, Homelander Brian, will fulfill my duties as a superhero. I will fight for you, and fight for justice. Fight for all mankind. Even if I am torn to pieces, it will not shake my determination. I will fight the Black Emperor Eyebrow with a body of steel, until justice defeats evil. My heart and my actions are as clear as a mirror, and everything I do is justice. Brian's voice exploded in New York City. Even other humans who are still hiding in the air raid shelter also heard Brian's powerful words, which contained the wrath of God, but were extremely exciting and made people see hope instantly. Homelander, Homelander. After Brian finished speaking, the citizens of New York who were crawling on the ground all raised their heads and looked at Brian enthusiastically. At this moment, Brian in their eyes is God, Jesus who brings them hope and justice. Superhero 7, assemble. Brian gave the order directly to the X-Men. All the X-Men, including Professor X, obeyed Brian's order and walked behind Brian. At this moment, Brian has become the real leader of the Superhero 7. Bang! Brian opened his hands, and a ball of red enveloped all the X-Men. When the red mist disappeared, Brian and others also disappeared in front of the citizens of New York. When Brian 500 and others appeared again, they had returned to Xavier Manor. X-Men have lost the qualification of superhero. Professor X sat on the ruins of Xavier Manor, looked at Brian standing upright in front of him, and sighed helplessly. As Brian shouted out the title of the Superhero 7, the entire New York citizenry remembered the name of this superhero team. As for the name of X-Men, they have selectively forgotten it. After Brian delivered a speech on justice execution, in their eyes, there was only superhero Brian the Huxia. As for X-Men, what X-Men? Aren't they members of the Superhero 7? Professor X knew it very well. From this moment on, X-Men has completely ended. X-Men is just a mutant team, and no longer a superhero team. Professor X felt a little lost. Brian's action has announced that he has completely left X-Men. Although Professor X had expected this day a long time ago. But when this day really came, Professor X still couldn't let it go. X-Men was originally a temporary mutant organization established to fight against Black Emperor Shaw, isn't it? Else. Magneto walked to Professor X's side, gently patted Professor X's shoulder, and comforted him. Eric, are you also planning to leave the X-Men? Professor X glanced at Magneto. Through telepathy, he already knew Magneto's thoughts. You know, Charles, X-Men are not suitable for me. Magneto shrugged and said bluntly, Are you going to join Brian's superhero team? Professor X sighed and asked. Brian did invite me to follow him. Magneto was silent for a moment and spoke. What's your decision? Do you want to accept his invitation? Professor X asked curiously. I haven't thought about it yet. Magneto shook his head and said confusedly, Professor X, Magneto, is it too early for you to discuss this? Our primary goal now is to kill Black Emperor Shao. Brian's voice rang in the minds of Professor X and Magneto. Professor X and Magneto looked at each other and agreed with Brian's words. Brian, how do you plan to kill Black Emperor Shao? Professor X retracted his divergent thoughts and asked Brian. Definitely, he will directly blow up Black Emperor Shao. Brian's face was extremely confident at this moment. Now, after obtaining Professor X's telepathy, he no longer needed the power of X-Men to deal with Black Emperor Shao. The next stage was the stage for Brian and Black Emperor Shao. He had no intention of letting X-Men intervene. Now Brian has the ability to fight Black Emperor Shao alone. Holy shit, are you going to fight Black Emperor Shao alone? Chapter 93. In front of the ruined Xavier Manor. Professor X and other X-Men looked at Brian in front of them in doubt. They couldn't believe what they heard. Brian was going to fight Black Emperor Shao head-on? Professor X and others took a breath. They had thought of many ways to fight Black Emperor Shao before. For example, let Brian be the meat shield of the X-Men. Magneto used his magnetic field control to launch a sneak attack from the side and wait for an opportunity to take off the helmet on Black Emperor Shao's head. Then Professor X used telepathy to control Black Emperor Shao. Then they studied how to kill Black Emperor Shao. Even Professor X was ready to control Black Emperor Shao for his whole life. Even Magneto had imagined that he could use Black Emperor Shao's identity as a student to move Black Emperor Shao with emotions and let Black Emperor Shao willingly die. The only thing they hadn't thought of was to fight Black Emperor Shao head-on. So, when they heard that Brian was going to fight Black Emperor Shao head-on, they were shocked. Brian, you are really fishy. The ability to adapt to evolution allows you to face almost any extreme environment. But even if you have an infinitely adaptable body, you can only fight Black Emperor Shao on equal terms, and you can't really defeat Black Emperor Shao. As for defeating Black Emperor Shao, it is almost impossible. Professor X was the first to speak his mind. He admitted that Brian was very strong. However, Black Emperor Shao's ability is the most buggy at this stage. Energy absorbing makes Black Emperor Shao immune to all physical attacks. And the Mind Protection Helmet makes Black Emperor Shao completely immune to mind attacks. It can be said that Black Emperor Shao is wearing a double buff of physical immunity and mind immunity at this moment. The current Black Emperor Shao is invincible. Professor X doesn't think Brian can defeat Black Emperor Shao head-on, even if Brian has copied many variant abilities. However, as long as Brian's abilities are still physical, energy, and mind, Brian has no way to cause damage to Black Emperor Shao. Charles is right. Magneto nodded and agreed with Professor X's opinion. Although Magneto wanted to kill Black Emperor Shao right now, but he was just thinking about it. X-Men, you know nothing about my power. Brian laughed. He laughed recklessly. Now, it was time for Brian to strike hard. He was now standing at the top of the mutant universe. Boom. As Brian laughed recklessly, the violent psychokinesis pressure was transmitted from his body. At the moment, Brian no longer hid himself and began to release his psychokinesis with all his strength. The violent psychokinesis was like a mountain, covering the entire ruins of Xavier Manor. Bang! The Xavier Manor, which had already become a ruin, was instantly turned into powder under Brian's mental pressure. At the same time, the ground collapsed. Professor X and others were caught off guard, and were instantly Brian's psychokinesis made it impossible to breathe, and his body was directly pressed into the ground. Magnetic field. Magneto's body was pressed against the ground by Brian's psychokinesis, and he could only use his hands to open an invisible magnetic field for himself and Professor X. As for Beast Hank, Cyclops Scott, and Shockwave Alex, they fainted directly under Brian's psychokinesis. With just one psychokinesis outbreak, only Professor X and Magneto were left in the X-Men. The two future mutant leaders looked at Brian standing proudly in horror and were shocked and speechless for a while. They knew very well that Brian's power was very strong, but they had no specific concept of how strong it was. And now, they have a deep understanding of Brian's power. Brian is already like Black Emperor Shao. He has an invincible posture. If I have to describe him, it is Superman. At the moment, Brian is already the same as Superman in DC Comics. His power has completely begun to surpass the model. Brian glanced at Professor X and Magneto on the ground, and then waved his hand to release a ball of red mist to cover Professor X and others. Professor X and others have not yet reacted. All X-Men members have instantly appeared in the X-enhanced room of the nuclear shelter, looking at the familiar yet unfamiliar X-enhanced room in front of him. Professor X subconsciously glanced at the X-enhanced room control panel, and then smiled bitterly. There is no chair in this X-enhanced room built entirely by Brian. If he had not been injured, Professor X would probably have to stand to start the brainwave enhancement machine. And now, Professor X, who has a wheelchair, has no such troubles. Buzz. Just when Professor X was sighing, he suddenly felt that he was wrapped in an invisible magnetic field. Then, his brain saw the situation of the entire New York. This is Brian's magnetic field perception, ? Professor X was stunned for a moment, and telepathy instantly let him know what this magnetic field was. This is Brian's magnetic field perception. Now, Brian connected the magnetic field perception with Professor X's life magnetic field. This allows Professor X to see the whole New York through magnetic field perception like Brian. Professor X, use your brainwave enhancer to broadcast my next battle live. I want all mankind to witness the next New York final battle with their own eyes. I, Brian, will become the Superman of the mutant universe. Brian's voice rang in Professor X's mind. Professor X was silent for a moment, but still listened to Brian's mental transmission and put the X helmet in front of him on his head. Boom. As the brainwave enhancer started, Professor X's consciousness was connected to the global human beings. At the same time, the eyes of the global human beings were dazed for a while, and then they saw the situation of the entire New York City clearly in front of them. The global human beings fell into a brief panic because of this. Then, in their minds, Professor X's gentle voice that instantly calmed everyone was heard. Hello, all people in the world. I am Professor X, the leader of the X-Men. Superhero Homelander Brian, in order to save all mankind, resolutely fights Black Emperor Shao. This battle is related to the survival of the world. It also concerns the life and death of everyone. Homelander wins, world peace. Black Emperor Shao wins, the world is destroyed. Let us pray that our superhero, Homelander Brian, can win the final victory. This will be a final battle. Professor X's voice spread all over the world. People all over the world know that Brian will fight Black Emperor Shao to the death for all mankind and for justice. Homelander, Homelander. At this moment, Homelander Brian's name seemed to turn into a beam of light, shining on the justice of all mankind. In Xavier's manner, Brian used the power of telepathy to perceive that Professor X had connected the consciousness of all mankind, and a smile suddenly appeared on his face. Now, let the entire mutant universe forgive me. 014309230 Falu 1710-72250. What is the power of a supermodel? Brian's body slowly floated up. His body flew towards the sun. At this moment, Brian faced the sun, opened his hands, bathed in the sun, and slowly closed his eyes. A minute later, Brian suddenly clenched his hands and opened his eyes instantly. A deep red laser beam burst out from Brian's eyes and hands. Cyclops' ability allows Brian to strengthen Cyclops by absorbing solar energy. The more solar energy absorbed, the stronger the power of Cyclops. At this moment, the laser that absorbed the energy of the sun for a minute evaporated the air in front of Brian the moment he opened his eyes. Boom. A deep red laser swept across most of New York for hundreds of kilometers at the speed of light. Wherever it passed, the air was split in two. It was as if the sky was split in half. Boom. In the center of New York City, Black Emperor Shao, who was absorbing the energy of the nuclear explosion, was knocked out by the laser before he could react. The violent energy pushed Black Emperor Shao and knocked a huge gully out of the ground all the way. Boom. Black Emperor Shao was pushed several kilometers away by the laser. Until he hit the ruins of a building, Black Emperor Shao suddenly clenched his fists, and his feet were deeply embedded in the ground, fixing his body. On his chest, the laser was still emitting terrifying energy. The constant flow of energy forced He Huang Shao to stop absorbing the energy of the nuclear explosion and start to concentrate on dealing with the laser in front of him. Buzz. He Huang Shao opened his hands and absorbed the energy inside the laser into his body. The laser retreated step by step and gradually left his chest. Boom. He Huang Shao exerted a little force on his feet, and his whole body jumped out again from half of his body embedded in the ground. At this moment, He Huang Shao frowned and looked at the laser that had traveled hundreds of kilometers. A solemn look appeared on his face. The energy contained in the laser was too strong. Even he could not absorb all the energy in an instant. Just like absorbing the energy of a nuclear reactor, He Huang Shao needed some time to completely absorb these lasers. Who is it? Who is attacking me? He Huang Shao opened his own energy to the maximum, and all the laser energy within 5 meters of him collapsed and was absorbed into his body. Black Emperor Shao looked in the direction of the laser attack, but he couldn't see Brian, who was hundreds of kilometers away. At this moment, Kyan's eyes were emitting deep red energy halos. The red star cloak behind him fluttered under the vibration of the air. Bang! The 4 huge amounts of angel wings behind Brian spread open. At the same time, under the 4 angel wings, there were 4 super huge amounts of tornadoes. Under Brian's control, the tornadoes were like 4 turbocharged tornado engines under the angel wings. Boom! Brian looked in the direction of Black Emperor Shao. Then he released the flight ability with all his strength. The 4 wings behind him flapped violently, and Kyan's body instantly flew towards Black Emperor Shao. With Brian's full firepower, his flight speed instantly reached the terrifying Mach 100. Rumble. At such a terrifying speed, the whole of New York could hear the huge sound barrier sound emitted by Brian's flight. The super-fast flight speed made Brian appear in front of Black Emperor Shao almost in a breath. Before Black Emperor Shao could react, Brian had already clenched his fist and punched Black Emperor Shao in the chest. Boom. Brian did not even use his super strength. He just used the kinetic energy generated by flight. Black Emperor Shao's body was instantly blown away for dozens of kilometers. He was directly blasted from the center of New York City to Brooklyn, a full distance of 20 kilometers. At the moment when Black Emperor Shao's body arrived in Brooklyn, Brian had already flown behind Black Emperor Shao and punched him again. Black Emperor Shao's body was like a pinball and was blasted from Brooklyn to Midtown Manhattan again, a full distance of 10 kilometers. Boom. Black Emperor Shao's body successively knocked down some of the remaining building debris in Brooklyn and Midtown Manhattan, and then his entire body was directly smashed into the rubble. Psychokinesis. Brian's body instantly flew above Black Emperor Shao. Then psychokinesis erupted. All the ruins around Black Emperor Shao were rapidly floating to the sky under Brian's psychokinesis. Then all the ruins, under the control of Brian's psychokinesis, turned into a huge ruin block weighing thousands of tons. F***K. On the ground, Black Emperor Shao was dizzy from the sudden attack. After finally getting rid of the dizziness, he saw Brian floating in the air, holding a huge ruin block weighing thousands of tons in his hands, and smashing it down with all his strength. Boom. This ruin block, under the blessing of Brian's super strength, fell to the ground like a meteorite. It rubbed against the air directly and turned into a huge fireball. Boom. Black Emperor Shao had just walked out of the ruins pit when he was buried directly by this huge amounts of ruins. The entire ground collapsed because of the weight of the ruins, and a huge amounts of deep pit appeared. Holy shit, is this Brian's real power? At this moment, in the nuclear disaster center of the Weir Manor. Professor X and others took a breath of cold air. They were shocked by Brian's series of dazzling attacks. In fact, the power displayed by Cayenne, in Brian's words, it's too supermodel. Now Brian's performance is killing, comparable to Superman in DC Comics. With a wave of his hand, he can easily destroy the entire New York City, not only Professor X and others. At this moment, the human beings around the world, under Brian's series of attacks, completely regarded Brian as a god. They became Brian's fanatics in an instant. Even now, even if Brian said that he was the incarnation of God, they would believe it without a doubt. The Father of God, Homelander. Homelander is simply the incarnation of God on Earth. We are saved. Money. Humanity is saved. Human beings around the world. At this moment, the sound of mountains and tsunamis almost drowned Professor X. Professor X looked painful. The sudden burst of the voice of the mind from the global human beings made Professor X miserable and his head hurt. Magneto was always paying attention to Professor X's situation. After seeing Professor X's face full of pain and his head hurting, Magneto subconsciously wanted to turn off the brainwave amplifier directly. However, Magneto had not taken any action yet. Professor X, who was screaming in pain, stopped Magneto. "Eric, I can't insist. No matter what, Brian is fighting for the future of this world. Although we can't go to the battlefield. However, I still want to contribute a part of my history to this battle." Professor X's face was full of pain, but his voice was extremely firm. After hearing Professor X's words, Magneto was stunned for a moment, then reached out and patted Professor X's shoulder. "I know those voices make you very painful. Charles, you are not alone. You still have us and the X-Men." Magneto looked at Professor X seriously, and then held Professor X's right hand when Professor X was stunned. "Yes, Magneto is right. Professor X, you still have us." Beast Hank came over, patted Professor X's shoulder, and then held Professor X's left hand. Then Cyclops Scott and Shockwave Alex came to Magneto and Beast Hank respectively, and held their hands. At this moment, the X-Men stood hand in hand, and in the center of the X-Men, Professor X was deeply moved. Without Magneto and others saying anything, Professor X already knew what they wanted to do. Magneto and others wanted to take on the global voice of the heart with him. "X-Men, assemble," Professor X said with gratitude, and then transmitted part of the voice of the heart to the brains of Magneto and others.
If you're enjoying the story so far and want to hear the next parts, don't forget to like the video. It really helps the channel grow. And if you'd like me to continue the series, drop a comment below letting me know. Your feedback and support keep these audiobooks going strong. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.